The revolver shook in her hands. Marisol Kane hadn't eaten in 3 days, and the freight hauler standing 15 feet away represented her last chance at survival. One squeeze of the trigger, one dead man on the Arizona dust, and she could take his wagon south before the bounty hunters found her trail. But when Gideon Vale turned around slowly, hands empty at his sides, he didn't look afraid. He looked tired. "Go ahead," he said quietly, "but if you pull that trigger, you'll never see your children again." The words hit harder than any bullet ever could. If you want to see how a desperate mother's gamble becomes the most dangerous journey of her life, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Ouch. Marisol's finger froze on the trigger. The man shouldn't have known. Nobody knew. She'd buried that truth so deep inside herself that some mornings she woke up and pretended it wasn't real. But here stood this stranger in a dust-covered coat, watching her with eyes that didn't judge, didn't mock, just waited. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice came out hoarse. The lie tasted like ash. Gideon tilted his head slightly. "You're running southwest, not northwest toward California where the real money is. Not east back to Texas. Southwest, toward Sonora, maybe deeper. That's not where people run when they're just looking to disappear." He paused. "That's where people run when they're looking for something." She should have shot him right then. A smart woman would have, but her hands wouldn't cooperate, and her stomach cramped so violently she nearly doubled over. When was the last time she'd eaten? Tucson, maybe. A half-rotten apple stolen from behind a cantina. Before that, nothing but creek water and whatever roots she could dig up without slowing down. "You're starving," Gideon said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine. You're about 10 minutes from passing out." He gestured toward the wagon behind him. "I've got cornbread and dried beef. Not much, but it'll keep you breathing." Marisol's vision blurred at the edges. The revolver suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "Why would you feed someone pointing a gun at your chest?" "Because I've seen that look before." Gideon took one careful step forward, then stopped when she jerked the barrel up higher. "My sister had it, right before she died on the Goodnight Trail. Starved herself trying to keep her kids fed during a drought. By the time I found her, she couldn't even stand anymore." The ground tilted under Marisol's boots. She locked her knees, fighting the darkness creeping in from the sides. "I'm not your sister," she managed. "No," Gideon agreed, "but you're someone's mother, and you're going to die out here if you don't put that gun down and eat something." The revolver slipped from her fingers. She didn't remember deciding to drop it. Her body just gave up on its own. The world spun sideways, and the last thing she saw before everything went black was Gideon Vale lunging forward to catch her before she hit the rocks. She woke up under a canvas tarp stretched between the wagon and a Joshua tree. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through, turning everything orange. Her mouth tasted like copper, and every muscle in her body screamed, "Easy." Gideon's voice came from somewhere to her left. "Don't sit up too fast." Marisol ignored him and tried anyway. Her head exploded with pain, and she immediately regretted it. "Told you." He appeared in her line of sight, holding a tin cup. "Drink this first. Just water." She snatched the cup and drained it in 4 desperate gulps. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the best thing she'd experienced in days. When she finished, Gideon refilled it from a canteen without comment. "Where's my gun?" she asked. "In the wagon. Unloaded." He settled back on his heels, studying her face. "You sleep for about 2 hours. I checked your pulse a few times to make sure you weren't dying. Didn't seem polite to let you go without asking your name first." "I didn't give you permission to—" "You also tried to rob me," Gideon interrupted mildly. "So maybe we're even on the politeness front." Marisol's jaw tightened. She forced herself to sit all the way up, ignoring the nausea. "I wasn't really going to shoot you." "Weren't you?" The question hung between them. Honest answer? She didn't know. 3 days ago, maybe not. But hunger did things to a person, made them sharper in some ways, desperate in others. She'd seen women kill over a sack of flour during the war, seen men cut each other's throats for a canteen. "What do you want?" she asked instead. Gideon reached behind him and produced a plate. Cornbread, like he'd promised, along with several thick strips of jerky and what looked like a boiled egg. Marisol's stomach twisted so violently she almost vomited. I want you to eat, he said simply. Then I want you to tell me where you're really going. And after that, we'll figure out if I can help. I don't need help. You passed out holding a gun on me. That was... She stopped, hating how weak she sounded. Temporary. He set the plate down between them. Eat first, argue later. Marisol wanted to refuse, wanted to grab the food and run, or spit in his face, or do literally anything except accept charity from a stranger who probably wanted something worse than robbery in return, but her body betrayed her. Her hand shot out before her brain caught up, and suddenly she was cramming cornbread into her mouth so fast she barely tasted it. Gideon watched without expression. Didn't tell her to slow down, didn't make disgusted faces at her manners, just waited while she devoured everything on the plate like a wild animal. When she finally finished, shame crashed over her in waves. There's more if you need it, Gideon said quietly. I don't. The words came out too sharp. Marisol wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, avoiding his eyes. Thank you. You're welcome. He stood, brushing dust off his trousers. Now, you going to tell me about your children, or do I have to keep guessing? The air left her lungs in a rush. How did you... You talk in your sleep. Gideon's expression didn't change. Said 2 names. Kept asking someone to give them back. Doesn't take a genius to work out the rest. Marisol's hands curled into fists. They're none of your business. Maybe not. But I'm heading south anyway, hauling freight to a ranch outside Nogales. If you're going that direction, you can ride along. Safer than walking. I don't need... Yeah, you've mentioned. He started walking back toward the wagon. Offer stands anyway. I'm leaving at first light. If you're here, you're here. If not, I'll leave your gun by the tree. He disappeared around the far side of the wagon before she could respond. Marisol sat there under the tarp, feeling the weight of the food in her stomach and the even heavier weight of his words. Give them back. Had she really said that out loud? She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the memories that threatened to surface. Sophia's scream as they dragged her toward the wagon. Miguel's small hand reaching for her while men held her back. The woman in the expensive dress who'd promised safety, promised work, promised a future. Lying bitch, Marisol whispered into the growing darkness. She should run. Grab the gun, take some food if she could manage it without waking him, and disappear into the desert before dawn. That was the smart play. Trust no one, need no one, stay invisible. But her children were somewhere south of here, and she'd been searching for 3 months with nothing to show for it except bounty posters, empty leads, and the kind of exhaustion that made a person point guns at strangers. Maybe, just maybe, traveling with someone made her less conspicuous. A woman alone drew attention. Questions, propositions, threats. A woman traveling with a man, even as cargo or hired help, blended into the background. And if Gideon Vale turned out to be like every other man she'd ever trusted, well, she'd killed before. She could do it again if necessary. First light came cold and blue across the Arizona wasteland. Marisol woke to the sound of Gideon hitching his horses, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She'd slept under the tarp again, and sometime during the night he'd draped a blanket over her without waking her up. That should have bothered her more than it did. She folded the blanket carefully and approached the wagon. Her revolver sat exactly where he'd said it would be, unloaded, resting on a flat rock near the Joshua tree. She checked the cylinder out of habit, then tucked it into the back of her belt. Coffee's ready if you want some, Gideon called without turning around. Tastes like mud, but it's hot. Marisol found the pot balanced on rocks near the previous night's fire. She poured herself a cup using a dented tin mug and immediately understood his warning. The coffee tasted like something scraped off the bottom of a mine shaft. She drank it anyway. So, Gideon said, finishing with the horses and turning to face her. You coming or not? Direct. No games, no manipulation, no pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Marisol appreciated that more than she wanted to admit. Nogales, you said. Near there. Ranch about 10 miles east. How long? 4 days if the weather holds. Maybe 5. She took another sip of terrible coffee, buying time to think. 4 days of potential danger versus 4 days of someone else worrying about supplies, navigation, and whether armed men were following them. When she looked at it that way, the choice seemed obvious. I need to make a stop, she said finally. Before Nogales. Gideon waited. There's a town called Tres Piedras, about 2 days south of here, maybe less. I need to talk to someone there. About your children? It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. He studied her face for a long moment, and Marisol forced herself not to look away. Let him see whatever he wanted to see. She was done pretending to be something softer than she was. All right, Gideon said. Tres Piedras is on the way. We'll stop. Just like that. No demands for explanation, no negotiating for favors, no insisting she tell him the whole story first. Marisol's suspicion flared hotter. What's your angle? She asked bluntly. My angle? Nobody helps for free. What do you want from me? Gideon's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close. You know what I want? I want to get to Nogales without some desperate woman shooting me for my supplies. Seems like bringing you along solves that problem. There are easier ways to stay safe. Probably. He climbed up onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. But I'm not particularly interested in easy. You coming or walking? Marisol drained the last of her coffee and tossed the grounds into the dirt. Then she hauled herself up onto the seat beside him, leaving a careful foot of space between them. If you try anything, she started. Yeah, you'll shoot me. I got it. Gideon snapped the reins, and the horses leaned into their harnesses. The wagon lurched forward with a creak of wood and metal. Must be exhausting, threatening everyone you meet. Keeps me alive. Does it? He glanced sideways at her. Seems like you were about 5 minutes from dead when I found you. Marisol didn't have a good answer for that, so she settled for glaring at the horizon and pretending the conversation was over. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something thick and breathless. Marisol watched the landscape roll past, endless stretches of pale dirt broken up by scrub brush, cacti, and the occasional cluster of rocks that might charitably be called hills. Nothing lived out here except scorpions, rattlesnakes, and people too stubborn or too stupid to go somewhere better. So what happened? Gideon asked eventually. What happened to what? Your kids. How'd they end up gone? Every muscle in Marisol's body went tight. I don't want to talk about it. Fair enough. He didn't push, which somehow made it worse. The silence stretched out again, heavier this time. She lasted maybe 10 minutes before the pressure became unbearable. There was a woman, Marisol heard herself saying, in Yuma, called herself Mrs. DeHaven. She ran a boarding house, said she helped families down on their luck. The words tasted like poison. I was down on my luck. Gideon didn't interrupt. My husband died 6 months before. Fever took him in 3 days. We didn't have savings. He was a miner, drank most of what he earned. After he was gone, I couldn't pay rent. Couldn't feed Sophia and Miguel properly. I was working 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and taking in laundry at night, but it wasn't enough. She'd never said this out loud before. Not to anyone. But something about Gideon's steady silence made the story spill out like water from a cracked jar. Mrs. DeHaven said she knew families looking for help. Good families, she said. Ranch owners who needed kids to help with light work, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, that kind of thing. Said they'd be fed, clothed, educated. Better than what I could give them. Marisol's laugh came out bitter. I actually believed her, thought I was doing the right thing. When did you figure out you weren't? About 3 weeks later. I went to visit them at the address she gave me. Turned out to be an empty lot. When I went back to confront her, the boarding house was cleared out. Every trace of her. Gone. Her hands tightened on the edge of the wagon seat. Took me another month to find someone who'd actually talk. A washerwoman who'd heard things. Told me Mrs. DeHaven wasn't placing children with families. She was selling them. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Selling them to who? Gideon's voice had gone very quiet. Ranchers, mostly. People who need workers but don't want to pay wages. Kids are cheaper than adult laborers, easier to control. She swallowed hard. The washerwoman said there's a whole network, stretches from California to Texas, down into Mexico. They move the children around, make them hard to trace. Jesus Christ. Don't! The word came out sharp. Don't say his name like it means something. If there's anyone up there watching, he's not paying attention to people like me. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. So you've been tracking them. For how long? 3 months, following rumors, bribing anyone who'll talk, checking every ranch and camp I can find. Exhaustion pulled at her bones just thinking about it. Tres Piedras is the best lead I've gotten. Someone there supposedly knows where DeHaven operates now. And if they don't, then I keep looking. Simple as that. She'd look until she died or found them, whichever came first. The wagon hit a rut, jostling them both. Gideon corrected smoothly, his hand steady on the reins. "I'll help you," he said. Marisol turned to stare at him. "What?" "After I deliver this freight, I'll help you search. 2 people cover more ground than 1. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. You know I tried to rob you yesterday, and I know why." He met her eyes briefly before returning his attention to the horses. "Look, I'm not a good man, Marisol. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I had a sister once, and she had kids, and I couldn't save them when it mattered. Maybe I can't fix that, but I can help you fix this." Something cracked open in Marisol's chest. Something dangerous and unfamiliar. Hope, maybe. Or just the terrible temptation to trust someone again. "I don't have money to pay you," she said. "Didn't ask for money." "Then what? Just let me help. That's all." His jaw tightened. Not everything has to be a transaction. Marisol wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was lying, that everyone wanted something, that kindness was just cruelty wearing a patient mask. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself nodding, just once, and turning back to watch the desert roll past. They didn't talk much after that, but the silence felt different somehow, less hostile, almost companionable. They made camp that night near a dry creek bed that might have held water during the spring rains. Gideon unhitched the horses and set them to graze on whatever tough grass they could find while Marisol gathered firewood, mostly dead mesquite branches that burned hot and fast. Dinner was more cornbread, beans cooked in a cast-iron pot, and coffee that somehow tasted even worse than the morning batch. Marisol ate slowly this time, trying to prove to herself, and maybe to Gideon, that she had some self-control left. "Tell me about them," Gideon said suddenly. She looked up from her plate. "Who?" "Sophia and Miguel." "What are they like?" No one had asked her that, not once in 3 months. They'd asked where the kids were, who took them, whether she'd filed a report with the marshal, but no one had asked what they were like, as if they were real people instead of just a problem to be solved. "Sophia's 8, Marisol said slowly. "She's fierce, smart, too smart sometimes. She asks questions that make adults uncomfortable. Wants to know how things work, why people do what they do." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. She once made a mine foreman explain the entire process of silver extraction because she didn't believe him when he said it was too complicated for a little girl to understand. Gideon huffed something that might have been a laugh. "I like her already." "Miguel's 6. He's quieter. Watches everything, doesn't miss much, but he thinks before he talks. He loves animals. Used to bring home every stray cat and injured bird he found. Drove me crazy, but..." Her throat tightened. "He's got the gentlest hands. Even the mean dogs in our neighborhood would let him pet them." "They sound like good kids." "They are." The present tense came automatically, fiercely. "They are good kids." Gideon nodded, understanding the correction. "We'll find them." "You can't promise that." "No," he agreed. "But I can promise I'll help you try." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the enormous darkness overhead. Marisol pulled her knees up to her chest, staring into the flames. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "I told you." "The truth, Gideon." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and tired. "My sister's name was Caroline," he said. "She married a rancher up in the Panhandle. Good man by all accounts. They had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. When the drought hit in '76, they lost everything. Cattle died, crops failed, no water for miles. Her husband went north looking for work and never came back." Marisol waited. Caroline tried to keep the ranch going by herself. Sold everything that wasn't nailed down, ate less so the kids could eat more. By the time I got word something was wrong and made it out there, she'd been dead 2 weeks, starved to death in her own bed. His voice went flat, reciting facts. "The kids were gone. Neighbors said the county took them to an orphanage in Dallas, but when I got there, the orphanage had no record. Took me 4 months to track them down. They'd been split up, sent to different workhouses across 3 states. Did you get them back? Got the oldest boy back, James. He's 17 now, working on a ranch in Montana. Good kid, strong. Gideon stared into the fire. The other 2 died before I could reach them. Typhoid took the girl. The younger boy died in a factory accident in Kansas City. He was 9 years old. The words settled over them like falling ash. I'm sorry, Marisol whispered. Yeah, me too. Gideon picked up a stick and poked at the fire unnecessarily. So when I say I know what you're going through, I mean it. And when I say I'll help you find your kids before it's too late, I mean that too. Marisol studied his face in the firelight, the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with the freight in his wagon. This wasn't charity or pity. This was something else entirely. This was a man trying to balance a scale that would never be balanced. Okay, she said finally. We find them together. Gideon looked at her, and something passed between them, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it, an understanding that they were both carrying grief too heavy to bear alone. Together, he agreed. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers while the desert night settled around them like a held breath. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The horses shifted nervously. And for the first time since her children disappeared, Marisol Kane fell asleep without nightmares. Tres Piedras announced itself with the smell of livestock and unwashed humanity. They reached the outskirts just after noon on the 3rd day, and Marisol felt her entire body tense as the first buildings came into view. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 20 structures total, half of them looking ready to collapse. A general store, a saloon, what might have been a church once but now appeared to be housing chickens. The rest were houses in various states of decay. Where's your contact? Gideon asked, slowing the wagon. Woman named Rosa Martinez runs a boarding house on the East End. They found it easily enough. The only 2-story building in town, painted a faded yellow that might have been cheerful once. Marisol climbed down from the wagon before it fully stopped, her hand instinctively checking for the revolver at her back. You want me to come? Gideon asked. She shook her head. Better if I go alone. Rosa doesn't trust men. Can't imagine why, he said dryly, but he didn't argue, just settled back on the wagon seat to wait. The boarding house door stood open to catch whatever breeze existed. Marisol knocked on the frame anyway, announcing herself. We're full up, a woman's voice called from somewhere inside. I'm not looking for a room, I'm looking for Rosa Martinez. A pause, then footsteps, and a woman appeared in the doorway. She was maybe 50, with iron gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. Who's asking? My name's Marisol Kane. A washerwoman in Yuma told me you might have information about a woman called Mrs. D. Haven. Rosa's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She glanced past Marisol to the wagon where Gideon waited, then back. That your man? Business partner. Rosa considered this. Come inside. Leave him out there. The interior of the boarding house was dim and smelled like lye soap and cooking onions. Rosa led her through a narrow hallway to a small kitchen where another woman, younger, pregnant, was peeling potatoes. Out, Rosa told her. The woman left without question. Rosa gestured for Marisol to sit at a scarred wooden table. She remained standing. How much did the washerwoman tell you? Rosa asked. That there's a network, that they sell children to ranchers and mines, that you know how it works. And what makes you think I'd help you? Marisol met her eyes directly. Because the washerwoman said you lost a granddaughter to them 3 years ago. Rosa's face could have been carved from stone. What do you want? Information. Where does DeHaven operate now? Who works with her? Where do they take the children? That's a lot of questions. I have 2 children out there somewhere, a girl and a boy, Sophia and Miguel Kane, 8 and 6 years old. Marisol's voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. I will pay any price for information that helps me find them. Rosa moved to the stove and poured herself coffee from a dented pot. She didn't offer any to Marisol. DeHaven moves around, she said finally. Never stays in one place longer than 3 months. Last I heard, she was working out of a place called Bitter Springs, about 60 miles southeast of here. But that was 6 weeks ago. Who does she work with? A man named Cyrus Webb runs the distribution. Takes the children from DeHaven and places them with buyers. He's got at least 4 ranches scattered across the territory where he holds them before final sale. Marsol's heart hammered. Do you know which ranches? 2 of them. Maybe 3. Rosa took a slow sip of coffee. But here's the thing, girl. Even if I tell you, even if you find these places, what then? You think they're just going to hand your children back because you ask nicely? No. You planning to shoot your way in? If I have to. Rosa almost smiled. Almost. You got sand, I'll give you that. Stupid sand, but sand. She set down her cup. The ranches I know about. One's called Diamond Creek, north of the border. Another's the Broken Jay, closer to Nogales. The third is somewhere in the mountains west of Tucson, but I don't have a name for it. How do I find Webb? You don't. He finds you if you get too close. Rosa's expression hardened. Listen to me carefully. These people aren't playing games. They've got connections, sheriffs, judges, land commissioners. You start poking around their operations, you won't live long enough to regret it. I don't care. You should. Rosa leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. My granddaughter's name was Luce. She was 7, smart as a whip, sang like an angel. DeHaven promised to place her with a nice family in California. I didn't find out the truth until it was too late. Her voice went flat. I tried what you're trying. Tracked them, followed leads, got close. You know what happened? They burned my house down with my son inside it, called it an accident. The marshal agreed. The kitchen felt suddenly colder. I'm sorry about your granddaughter, Marisol said carefully. But I'm not you. No? Rosa's eyebrows rose. You think you're tougher, smarter, more determined? I think I've got nothing left to lose. Everyone's got something left to lose, even when they think they don't. Rosa pushed away from the counter and crossed to a cabinet. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. This is a map. Marks the 2 ranches I'm certain about, Diamond Creek and the Broken Jay. The third's just a guess based on rumors. She held it out, but when Marisol reached for it, Rosa didn't let go immediately. If you find them, she said quietly, and if by some miracle you get them back, run. Don't stay in the territory. Don't try to bring these people to justice. Just take your children and disappear. I will. Rosa released the map. One more thing. DeHaven doesn't work alone anymore. She's got a man with her now. Goes by the name Fletcher. Mean drunk, likes hurting people. You run into him, don't hesitate. Just shoot. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll probably be dead inside a month. But Rosa's expression had softened slightly. For what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong. Marisol left the boarding house with the map burning a hole in her pocket and a new weight on her chest. Gideon looked up as she approached, reading something in her face. You get what you needed? He asked. More than I expected. She climbed back onto the wagon. We need to talk. He didn't start the horses moving, just waited. There are ranches, Marisol said. At least 2, maybe 3, where they're keeping children before selling them. One's called Diamond Creek. One's the Broken Jay. The third doesn't have a name, but it's somewhere west of Tucson in the mountains. How solid is this information? Solid enough. The woman who gave it to me lost her own granddaughter to these people. She pulled out the map and unfolded it. Diamond Creek is closest, about 40 miles northeast of here. Gideon studied the map, his expression unreadable. That's 6 days there and back, minimum. Plus, however long it takes to scout the place and figure out if your kids are there. I know. And if they're not, then we try the Broken Jay. She looked at him directly. I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want to drop me at the next town and be done with it, I understand. That what you think I'm going to do? I think you're a smart man who understands odds. And the odds of me surviving this are pretty bad. Gideon folded the map carefully and handed it back to her. Then he picked up the reins and started the horses moving, turning them northeast toward open country. Where are you going? Marisol asked. Diamond Creek. You coming or walking? Something loosened in her chest. That dangerous feeling again, the one she couldn't afford. But she didn't fight it this time, just nodded and settled in for the ride. They left Tres Piedras behind, and with it the last easy chance to turn back. Ahead lay nothing but dust, danger, and the slim possibility of finding 2 children in a territory the size of nightmares. But for the first time in 3 months, Marisol wasn't searching alone, and somehow that made all the difference. The land changed as they pushed northeast. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills studded with juniper and piñón, and the air carried the faint smell of pine resin mixed with dust. They passed abandoned homesteads, roofs caved in, walls crumbling back into the earth, silent monuments to dreams that hadn't survived contact with reality. Gideon kept the horses at a steady pace, neither rushing nor dawdling. He seemed to understand that speed wouldn't help if they arrived at Diamond Creek too exhausted to think straight. Marisol appreciated that, even if the slow progress made her want to scream. On the second day out from Tres Piedras, they spotted riders in the distance. 3 of them, moving parallel to the wagon about half a mile south. Too far to make out faces, but close enough to be intentional. "How long have they been there?" Marisol asked quietly. "Noticed them about an hour ago." Gideon didn't look directly at the riders, but his hands had shifted slightly on the reins. Ready. Could be nothing. Could be they're just heading the same direction. "You believe that?" "Not particularly." Marisol casually reached behind her back and loosened the revolver in her belt. She'd loaded it that morning with bullets Gideon had given her without comment. 5 shots. She'd have to make them count if it came to that. The riders stayed distant for another 2 hours, then gradually fell back and disappeared over a ridge. Neither Gideon nor Marisol relaxed until well after sunset. They made camp in a shallow depression surrounded by rocks. No fire this time. Cold beans and hardtack for dinner, eaten in near darkness, while the horses stamped nervously at shadows. "You think they're connected to Webb?" Marisol asked, keeping her voice low. "Maybe. Or maybe just opportunists who saw a wagon and thought about robbing it." Gideon checked his rifle for the 3rd time, a nervous habit she was starting to recognize. "Either way, we'll take watches tonight. You sleep first, I'll wake you in 4 hours." She wanted to argue that she could take first watch, but exhaustion had settled into her bones like lead. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket and lay down with the revolver under her makeshift pillow, listening to Gideon's quiet breathing and the vast silence of the territory around them. Sleep came in fragments. Every time she started to drift, her mind conjured images of Sophia and Miguel, locked in dark rooms, crying for her, wondering why she hadn't come. She'd jerk awake with her heart hammering, only to find Gideon still sitting watch, silhouetted against the stars. When he finally shook her shoulder, she came awake instantly with the gun already in her hand. "Easy," he said. "Just your turn." They switched positions without further conversation. Gideon was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of someone who'd learned to rest whenever possible. Marisol envied that. She'd forgotten how. The night stretched on forever. She kept expecting the riders to reappear, to come charging out of the darkness with guns blazing, but nothing moved except an owl hunting somewhere nearby and the occasional rustle of some small creature fleeing for its life. Dawn came gray and cold. They ate a hurried breakfast of more hardtack and set off before the sun cleared the horizon, both of them scanning the landscape for any sign of pursuit. The riders didn't reappear, but that somehow felt worse than if they had. At least then, Marisol would have known where they stood. By midday on the 4th day out from Tres Piedras, they reached the edge of what Rosa's map indicated was Diamond Creek territory. The land here had more water, actual creeks cutting through shallow canyons, cottonwoods clustered along the banks. Cattle grazed in scattered groups, branded with a diamond symbol inside a circle. "We need to be careful from here," Gideon said, pulling the wagon off the main trail and into a stand of trees. "If this is Webb's operation, they'll have people watching the approaches. So what do we do?" "We scout on foot, leave the wagon hidden." He started unhitching the horses. "There's supposed to be a ranch house somewhere in the next valley. We find it, watch it for a day or 2, see what we can learn." "A day or 2? Marisol's frustration boiled over. "My children could be in there right now and you want to just watch?" "I want to not get us both killed before we even know if they're there." Gideon's voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse. "Charging in blind helps no one." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He turned to face her fully. "But if we get caught, If we die trying to be heroes, who helps your kids then? Nobody. They stay lost. Is that what you want? The words hit like fists. Marisol opened her mouth to argue and found she had nothing to say. He was right, and she hated him for it. Fine, she managed. We watch first. They secured the wagon as best they could and set off on foot, moving carefully through the trees and staying away from open ground. Gideon carried his rifle. Marisol kept one hand on the revolver at all times, her nerves stretched tight as wire. The ranch house appeared just before sunset, nestled in a valley between two low hills. It was bigger than Marisol had expected, a main building made of adobe and timber, plus several outbuildings that might have been bunkhouses or storage. Corrals held more cattle and a few horses. Smoke rose from a chimney. They found a vantage point on the eastern hill, hidden behind a tumble of boulders where they could see the ranch without being seen themselves. Then they settled in to wait. Watching was worse than traveling. At least on the wagon, Marisol had something to do, even if it was just enduring discomfort. Here, there was nothing but silence and her own spiraling thoughts. The ranch showed signs of life as darkness fell. Lanterns lit in the main house. A man emerged from one of the outbuildings and crossed to another carrying something Marisol couldn't identify. Another figure, too distant to determine age or gender, moved near the corrals. "I don't see any children," she whispered. "Not yet. Doesn't mean they're not there." Gideon had his rifle resting across his knees, watching the ranch with the patient focus of a hunter. "We wait until morning, see who comes and goes." The night was agony. They took turns keeping watch again, though Marisol doubted either of them slept much. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow looked like someone approaching. Morning brought more activity. 3 men emerged from the bunkhouse around dawn, all of them armed. They moved like ranch hands, checking fences, tending animals, hauling feed. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Then, around mid-morning, the door of the main house opened and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, Marisol could tell she was well-dressed, too well-dressed for ranch work. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting she'd be obeyed. "That her?" Gideon asked quietly. "Dee Haven?" "I don't know, maybe." Marisol had only seen the woman twice, briefly, back in Yuma. Memory was a slippery thing. "I can't tell from here." The woman spoke to one of the ranch hands, gesturing toward the largest outbuilding. The man nodded and headed that direction. When he opened the door, Marisol's heart nearly stopped. Children. At least 6 of them, maybe more. They filed out into the sunlight, blinking like they weren't used to being outside. The distance made it impossible to see faces clearly, but Marisol could make out rough details, heights, hair color, the way they moved. "I need to get closer," she said. "Absolutely not. I can't see from here. I need to know if Sophia and Miguel are down there." Gideon grabbed her arm as she started to move. "You go down there now. They'll spot you in seconds. Then we both end up dead or captured, and your kids are still stuck. Let go of me." "No." His grip wasn't painful, but it was immovable. "Listen to me. Those children are out in the open. That means they're going to be doing something. Work, probably. We watch, we wait, and if your kids are there, we'll see them eventually. But we do this smart." Marisol wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, but the cold logic of his words sank in despite her fury, and she forced herself to stop pulling against his grip. "Fine," she hissed, "but if I see them and you try to stop me from going down there, if you see them, we'll figure it out together. That's the deal." He released her arm slowly, watching to make sure she wasn't about to bolt. They watched for the next 3 hours as the children worked. The ranch hands had them hauling water, mucking out stalls, carrying firewood. Hard labor for small bodies. One girl, couldn't have been more than 7, stumbled under the weight of a bucket and fell. A ranch hand yanked her up roughly, shaking her hard enough that Marisol could see her head snap back even from a distance. Her finger found the trigger of the revolver before she'd consciously decided to reach for it. "Not yet," Gideon murmured. "He's hurting her." "I know. But if you shoot him now, they'll kill every child down there before we can reach them. Is that what you want?" No, it wasn't, but watching felt like swallowing glass. The children worked through midday with only a brief break for what might have been food. Marisol studied each one desperately, trying to match heights and builds to her memories. That one there, brown hair, about the right height, could that be Miguel? But when he turned, the face was wrong. Too round, too pale. The girl who'd fallen earlier might have been Sophia's age, but her hair was too light, and she moved differently. Not the fierce, determined stride Sophia had inherited from her mother, but something more hesitant, beaten down. By late afternoon, Marisol had to accept what her eyes were telling her. Sophia and Miguel weren't here. These were someone else's children, someone else's nightmare. "We should leave," Gideon said quietly. "Get back to the wagon before dark." "We can't just abandon them." "We're not abandoning anyone, but we also can't save every child in the territory. You came here for Sophia and Miguel." "I know that." The words scraped her throat raw. "But no buts. I know this is hard. I know it feels wrong. But we have one shot at this, maybe two if we're lucky. We use that shot on the wrong ranch, your kids stay lost. Is that what you want?" It was the second time he'd asked her that question. The second time she'd hated the answer. They retreated as the sun started setting, moving carefully back through the trees to where they'd left the wagon. Neither spoke much. What was there to say? That night, Marisol lay awake staring at the stars and thinking about 6 children working themselves to exhaustion in a place that should have been someone's home. Thinking about the girl who'd fallen and been shaken. Thinking about how easy it would be to put a bullet in the ranch hand who'd done it. But Gideon was right. Revenge wouldn't save anyone. It would just get more people killed. "We'll come back," she said into the darkness. "What?" Gideon's voice came from where he sat keeping watch. "After we find Sophia and Miguel. We'll come back for those children." A long pause. Then, "Yeah, we will." It was probably a lie. They both knew the odds of surviving long enough to help anyone else were slim, but in that moment, it was the lie Marisol needed to hear. They broke camp before dawn and headed south toward the Broken J. According to Rosa's map, it was another 4 days of hard travel, maybe 5. The route would take them dangerously close to Nogales and the freight delivery Gideon was supposed to make. "We'll do the delivery first," he said when Marisol brought it up. "Get the wagon unloaded, collect my pay, then we head to the Broken J. That's 2 days we don't have. It's also the difference between having supplies for the search and starving in the desert." His tone was flat, brooking no argument. "I've already delayed this delivery by a week helping you. The client's going to be irritated. If I show up empty-handed because I abandoned the cargo, he'll spread word I'm unreliable. That ends my livelihood." "Your livelihood versus my children. It's not that simple and you know it." Gideon's hands tightened on the reins. "You think I'm doing this because I don't care? I'm doing it because caring isn't enough. We need money. We need supplies. We need a base to work from. 2 days won't make the difference you think it will." Marisol wanted to argue, but the fight had leaked out of her somewhere between Diamond Creek and here. "Fine. We make your delivery." The freight delivery turned out to be for a ranch called the Triple Cross, a sprawling operation that made Diamond Creek look like a homestead. The owner was a leathery man named Thornton who counted every crate before signing off on the delivery and paid Gideon in coins that he tested with his teeth first. "You're late," Thornton said, not quite accusing, but close. "Had some delays on the trail. Nothing I could control." Gideon pocketed the coins without flinching. "Won't happen again. See that it doesn't. I've got 3 other haulers who'd take this route for less money and fewer excuses." They left the Triple Cross with Gideon's jaw tight and Marisol's temper barely contained. The whole transaction had taken 6 hours. 6 hours of watching men load and unload crates, while her children remained lost somewhere in this vast, uncaring territory. But now the wagon was empty, and they had supplies: food, water, ammunition, and a destination. The Broken J sat in rougher country than Diamond Creek, closer to the border where the land turned mean and the law got thin. They approached it the same way they had the first ranch, leaving the wagon hidden and scouting on foot. This time, though, the operation was smaller. Just a main house and 2 outbuildings, fewer cattle, only 1 man visible working the property. It looked almost abandoned. "Something's wrong," Gideon muttered as they watched from behind a line of scrub oak. "Rosa said Webb uses these places to hold children before sale. This doesn't look like it's holding anything except dust." They waited anyway, watching through the afternoon and into evening. No children appeared, no additional workers. Just the 1 man, moving between buildings like he was checking on things that weren't there. "Place is empty," Marisol said finally, her voice hollow. Looks that way. So where are they? I don't know. Gideon lowered the rifle he'd been holding ready. Maybe Webb moved operations. Maybe this site got burned and they're using somewhere else now. Maybe Rosa's information was older than she thought. Marisol felt something crack inside her chest. So this was a waste. All of it. Not a waste. We learned 2 locations aren't holding your kids. That narrows the search. To what? The 3rd ranch that Rosa couldn't even name? That could be anywhere in 100 square miles of mountains? Then we go to Bitter Springs. Find DeHaven directly. He started backing away from their vantage point. Come on, there's nothing here. They made it maybe half a mile before they heard the horses. 4 riders this time, coming fast from the south. The same ones from before. Marisol was certain of it. They'd been followed, and she'd been too focused on the empty ranch to notice. Run! Gideon shouted. They ran. Through scrub and over rocks, lungs burning, legs pumping. Behind them, the riders closed the distance with the casual inevitability of predators who knew their prey couldn't escape. A gunshot cracked the air. Marisol felt the bullet pass close enough to her head that her hair moved. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Gideon stopped abruptly and turned, bringing the rifle up. Get behind me! What are you— Do it! She dove behind a boulder just as he fired. One of the riders jerked backward in his saddle but didn't fall. The others scattered, looking for cover, and in that brief moment of confusion, Gideon grabbed Marisol's arm and hauled her to her feet. Go! Back to the wagon! They ran again, but the riders had dismounted now and were advancing on foot. More shots. A rock near Marisol's head exploded into fragments. She felt something hot slice across her temple and realized she'd been hit. Not deep, not serious, but blood poured down the side of her face, blinding her left eye. Gideon pulled her into a narrow ravine, both of them gasping. He shoved the rifle into her hands. Can you shoot? Yes. Then cover us. I'm going to try something stupid. Before she could ask what that meant, he was gone, scrambling up the side of the ravine toward where the riders were advancing. Marisol wiped blood out of her eye and raised the rifle, waiting. A man appeared at the ravine entrance. She shot him in the chest without hesitation. He went down hard, not moving. 2 more appeared and she fired again but missed. The rifle jammed. She dropped it and pulled her revolver, hands shaking so badly she could barely aim. Then Gideon was there, tackling one of the men from behind. They went down in a tangle of limbs and dust. The other man turned toward Gideon's exposed back, raising his gun. Marisol shot him twice. He dropped. Gideon was still fighting the first man, both of them struggling for control of a knife. Marisol aimed, trying to find a clear shot, but they were moving too fast. Then Gideon got his knee up into the man's gut, twisted, and drove the knife home. Silence, except for their ragged breathing and the ringing in Marisol's ears from the gunshots. Where's the 4th one? She gasped. She'd— Dead. Got him before I came back for you. Gideon staggered to his feet, bleeding from his nose and a cut above his eye. You hit? Just grazed. She wiped at her temple again. The bleeding was already slowing. You? I'll live. He retrieved his rifle, checking it automatically. We need to move. Someone might have heard the shooting. They ran again, but this time there was no pursuit. When they finally reached the wagon, both of them collapsed against it, too exhausted to do anything but breathe. Who were they? Marisol asked after her lungs stopped burning. Don't know. Didn't stop to ask. Gideon was checking his wounds, prodding at bruises that were already darkening. But they were waiting for us, which means either they followed us from Tres Piedras or someone told them we'd be here. Rosa. Maybe. Or someone saw us asking questions and sent word ahead. He started hitching the horses with hands that shook slightly. Either way, we're compromised. Webb knows someone's looking for his operations. So what do? We get the hell out of this area before more men show up. He climbed onto the wagon seat, wincing. Then we figure out our next move. They drove through the night, neither willing to stop despite their exhaustion. Every sound made Marisol jump. Every shadow looked like another ambush waiting. By dawn, they'd put maybe 20 miles between themselves and the Broken Jay. Gideon finally pulled off the trail near a creek, and they made camp in a defensive position with good sight lines in all directions. We can't keep doing this, Marisol said as she cleaned the gash on her temple with water from the creek. Eventually we'll run into someone we can't fight off. I know. So what's the plan? Gideon was silent for a long time, staring at the creek. We go to Bitter Springs, he said finally. Find DeHaven. Make her tell us where your children are. And if she won't talk? His expression went cold. Then we make her wish she had. It wasn't a good plan. It wasn't even a smart plan. But it was all they had. They rested through the day, taking turns keeping watch and trying to recover from the previous night's violence. Marisol's temple throbbed with steady pain, but the wound was clean and would heal. Gideon's face looked like he'd been stomped by a horse, but nothing was broken. As evening approached, he pulled out Rosa's map again, studying it by the fading light. Bitter Springs is 6 days from here, he said, maybe 7, and it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than what we just survived? Different kind of dangerous. That was open combat. What we're walking into now, He shook his head. DeHaven's been operating for years. She's got protection, connections, people who'll kill anyone who threatens her business. We show up asking the wrong questions. We don't get a gunfight. We just disappear. Then we don't ask questions. We watch, we learn, we take what we need. Information doesn't just fall into your lap, Marisol. We're going to have to take risks. I've been taking risks since the day my children disappeared. She met his eyes. I'm not stopping now. He nodded slowly. All right, but we do this careful. No rushing in, no heroics. We get the information, we get out, and then we plan the actual rescue. Agreed. They broke camp at first light and headed southwest toward Bitter Springs. The land grew harsher, less water, more rock, vegetation that looked like it survived purely out of spite. They passed through settlements that barely deserved the name, places where people lived in dugouts and adobe shacks, and eyed strangers like they were either threats or prey. On the 4th day, they encountered a freight wagon heading north. The driver was a grizzled old man with one milky eye who looked like he'd outlived his own death by pure stubbornness. You folks headed to Bitter Springs? He called out as they approached. That a problem? Gideon asked carefully. Only if you're stupid or desperate. The old man spat tobacco juice into the dust. Place is run by a woman named of DeHaven. She don't take kindly to strangers poking around. We're just passing through. Sure you are. The milky eye fixed on Marisol in a way that made her skin crawl. Word of advice, miss. Whatever you're looking for in Bitter Springs, it ain't worth what it'll cost you. Turn around. Go back wherever you came from. Appreciate the concern, Marisol said, but we'll take our chances. The old man shrugged. Your funeral. Don't say I didn't warn you. He drove on, leaving them alone on the trail again. He knew, Marisol said quietly. Knew what? That we're looking for something. Probably guessed we're looking for children. She watched the wagon disappear into the distance. Which means DeHaven's reputation is well known. People understand what she does. And they either approve or they're too scared to interfere. Gideon's voice was grim. That's going to make this harder. They reached the outskirts of Bitter Springs just before sunset on the 7th day. The town was bigger than Tres Piedras, but not by much. Maybe 30 buildings clustered around a central square where a covered well provided the only reliable water for miles. Most of the structures looked temporary, like people had built them expecting to leave soon and then never quite managed it. Gideon found a stable willing to board the horses and wagon for a few coins. Then he and Marisol checked into a boarding house run by a Chinese woman who asked no questions and expected no conversation. Their room was barely big enough for the single narrow bed it contained. They'd have to share. Neither of them mentioned it. So how do we find her? Marisol asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and trying not to think about how close quarters they'd be sleeping. Same way we found everything else. We ask around, carefully. Gideon was checking his revolver, a habit she'd noticed he performed whenever he was thinking. But not tonight. Tonight we rest, we listen, and we figure out the lay of the land. I'm tired of resting. I know, but impatience gets people killed. He looked at her directly. Your children need you alive, Marisol. Not dead because you rushed in without thinking. She hated that he was right. Hated the waiting, the caution, the careful planning. But she nodded anyway. They went downstairs to the common room where the boarding house served dinner, a thin stew that tasted mostly of salt and questionable meat. A few other guests sat at nearby tables, eating in silence. Marisol listened. The conversations were sparse, but what little was said painted a picture of a town that ran on fear and mutual suspicion. No one trusted anyone. No one asked questions they didn't want answered. Perfect place for someone like DeHaven to operate. After dinner, Gideon went to the saloon across the square while Marisol stayed behind, claiming exhaustion. The truth was, he'd have better luck getting information from drunk men than she would. Women made men cautious. Alcohol made them careless. She waited in their tiny room, cleaning her revolver and trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. An hour passed, then 2. When Gideon finally returned, he looked troubled. "Well?" she asked. "DeHaven's here, or was recently. People know her name but won't talk about her directly. Lots of side-eye, lots of changing the subject." He sat heavily on the bed. "But I got one useful piece of information. There's a ranch about 5 miles west. Woman who runs it supposedly helps orphans, finds them homes. Nobody would say her name outright, but the description matches." "That's her." "Probably." He rubbed at his face. "Here's the problem. The ranch is fortified. Armed guards, dogs, the works. We're not getting in there without an invitation." "Then we get an invitation." "How?" Marisol thought about it, turning possibilities over in her mind. She places children with families, right? Claims she's helping them. That's the story. So we become a family looking to help. A couple who can't have children of their own, looking to give some poor orphan a better life. The lie tasted bitter, but she forced it out anyway. "We play the part. We get inside. And once we're there, we find out where my children are." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "That could work. Or it could get us killed the second she recognizes you." "She only saw me twice, briefly. I was thinner then, dirtier. Hair was longer." Marisol touched her temple where the wound was still healing. "I look different now." "Maybe, but that's a hell of a gamble." "Every option is a gamble at this point." She met his eyes. "I'm out of safe choices, Gideon. I'm out of time. If this is how we get to my children, then this is what we do." He studied her face, looking for something. Doubt, maybe. Fear. Whatever he was searching for, he didn't seem to find it. "All right," he said finally, "we'll try it your way. But if anything goes wrong, anything, we abort. No heroics, no last stands. We get out and regroup. Agreed?" "Agreed." They spent the rest of the night planning details, building a backstory that would hold up under scrutiny. By the time exhaustion finally dragged them both toward sleep, they had something resembling a workable plan. Marisol lay down on one side of the narrow bed, Gideon on the other, both of them fully clothed with weapons within reach. The space between them felt charged somehow, full of unspoken things neither was ready to name. "Thank you," she said into the darkness. "For what?" "For not leaving, for staying when you had every reason to run." She swallowed hard. "For believing my children are worth finding." Gideon was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "They're worth it because you're worth it, and you're worth it because you didn't quit, even when quitting would have been easier." Something shifted in her chest. That dangerous feeling again, the one that felt like hope or trust or something even more terrifying. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just lay there in the darkness, listening to him breathe, and let herself believe for just a moment that maybe they'd actually survive this. Tomorrow they'd walk into the wolf's den. Tomorrow they'd risk everything on a lie and a prayer. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marisol Kane wasn't alone. And somehow, that made facing tomorrow possible. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Marisol woke to find Gideon already up, standing by the single grimy window and watching the street below with the stillness of someone who'd been doing it for a while. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some." He didn't turn around. "There's a man across the street, been there since before dawn, just standing, watching this building." Marisol sat up, suddenly alert. "One of Webb's people?" "Don't know. Could be nothing. Could be we're already compromised." He finally looked at her. "We need to move fast today. Get to DeHaven's ranch before word spreads that we're asking questions." They dressed quickly, checking weapons out of habit. Marisol had taken to wearing a knife strapped to her calf in addition to the revolver. Small blade, easy to hide, sharp enough to do damage if it came to that. Gideon noticed but didn't comment. The boarding house owner had coffee ready downstairs. Actual coffee this time, not the burnt dirt mixture they'd been surviving on. Marisol drank 2 cups while Gideon inquired casually about hiring a buggy for the day. "Going somewhere?" the woman asked. Her English was accented but clear. "Thought we'd look at some of the ranches nearby," Gideon said easily. "Wife and I are considering settling in the area. Wanted to see what kind of operations folks are running." The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Most ranches not welcoming to strangers." "We're not strangers, we're potential neighbors." He smiled, and Marisol was struck by how natural he made it look, how easy the lie came. "Unless you'd recommend we look elsewhere." A long pause. Then the woman nodded toward the door. "Livery stable rents buggy. Tell them Lynn sent you. They give fair price." "Appreciate it." They left coins on the table and headed out. The man across the street was gone, but Marisol felt eyes on them anyway. The whole town had that feeling, like the buildings themselves were watching, judging, reporting back to someone. The buggy cost more than it should have, but Gideon paid without arguing. Within an hour, they were heading west on a dirt road that looked like it had been carved by water runoff and stubbornness in equal measure. "You nervous?" Gideon asked as they drove. "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He kept his eyes on the road. "Remember the story? We're James and Mary Garrett. Married 2 years, you can't have children. We've been looking to adopt but haven't found the right fit. We heard Mrs. DeHaven helps families like ours." "James and Mary," Marisol repeated. The names felt wrong in her mouth, like clothes that didn't fit. "What if she asks questions we haven't prepared for? Then we improvise. Just don't volunteer information. Let her do the talking, fill in the silences. People trust their own assumptions more than anything you could tell them." The ranch appeared around mid-morning, and Marisol's stomach dropped. It was bigger than Diamond Creek, more organized than the Broken J main house built of stone and timber, probably 10 rooms at least. Barn, bunkhouse, storage buildings, all in good repair. Corrals holding horses that looked well-fed and groomed. This wasn't some desperate operation scraping by. This was money. 2 men with rifles stood near the gate. They didn't point the weapons, but the message was clear. Gideon pulled the buggy to a stop. "Morning, we're here to see Mrs. DeHaven. Have an appointment." "No one mentioned visitors," one of the guards said. He was younger than the other, maybe 20, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "Must have been an oversight. We sent word from town yesterday." The lie came smooth as silk. "James and Mary Garrett. We're looking to provide a home for a child in need." The guards exchanged looks. The older one, graying hair, face like tan leather, jerked his chin toward the house. "Wait here. I'll check." He walked toward the main house while the younger guard kept his position. His eyes lingered on Marisol in a way that made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to smile pleasantly and look around like she was impressed with the property. The older guard returned 5 minutes later. "Mrs. DeHaven will see you. Leave any weapons in the buggy." "Of course." Gideon climbed down and made a show of removing his gun belt, laying it carefully on the seat. Marisol did the same with her revolver, though the knife on her calf stayed hidden beneath her skirt. They followed the guard to the house. Up close, the building looked even more impressive. Real glass windows, carved door frame, paint that wasn't peeling. Someone had put serious money into this place. The interior matched. Furniture that looked imported, carpets on the floor, paintings on the walls. This wasn't frontier living. This was civilization transplanted to the wilderness by force of will and cash. Mrs. DeHaven waited in what appeared to be a study. She sat behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people in the territory earned in a year. Her hands folded neatly in front of her. She was younger than Marisol had expected, maybe 40, handsome rather than beautiful, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," she said. Her voice was cultured, Eastern. "Please sit." They took the chairs across from her desk. Marisol kept her hands loose in her lap, fighting the urge to fidget. "I apologize for the confusion at the gate," DeHaven continued. "We didn't receive any word of your visit, but no matter, you're here now." She smiled, and it looked almost genuine. "I understand you're interested in providing a home for a child?" "That's right," Gideon said. "We've been married 2 years now, settled on a small ranch about 30 miles north. Good land, plenty of water. We're doing well enough to expand our family, but he glanced at Marisol with what looked like genuine sympathy. We've had difficulties. I see. DeHaven's gaze shifted to Marisol. How difficult, exactly? The question was invasive, designed to make her uncomfortable. Marisol swallowed and looked down. The doctor says I can't. That is, we've tried, but she's barren, Gideon finished bluntly. Doctor in Tucson confirmed it 6 months ago. The word hit Marisol like a slap, even though they'd agreed he'd say it, even though it was part of the act. She blinked hard, letting her eyes water slightly. I'm very sorry, DeHaven said, and she almost sounded like she meant it. That must be difficult for you both. It's been hard, Marisol managed, but we have so much love to give. We thought, if we could help a child who needs a home. A noble impulse. DeHaven leaned back in her chair, studying them. Tell me, how did you hear about my services? Woman in town, Gideon said. Didn't catch her name. Chinese lady, runs a boarding house. Said you help orphans find proper families. Ah, yes. DeHaven's smile returned. I do what I can. There are so many children in need, you understand. Parents who die, who abandon them, who simply can't provide. I've made it my mission to ensure these poor souls find loving homes rather than ending up in workhouses or on the streets. That's wonderful, Marisol said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. How many children have you helped? Oh, dozens over the years? Perhaps more. I don't keep precise count. What matters is the outcome, not the numbers. DeHaven stood and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. I do keep records, of course, for legal purposes. Let me see what we currently have available. Available. Like they were discussing livestock. DeHaven flipped through pages, humming softly. We have several children at the moment, ages ranging from 4 to 12. What were you hoping for? Somewhere in the middle, Gideon said. Old enough to help around the ranch, young enough to still need raising? Maybe 6 to 8 years old? Marisol's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. 6 to 8. Sophia and Miguel's ages. I have 3 in that range currently. DeHaven made notes on a piece of paper. 2 boys, 1 girl. Would you prefer a specific genders? We're open, Marisol said. Her voice came out strained, and she quickly added, we just want the right fit, you know? A child who'll thrive with us. Of course, DeHaven set down her pen. I should mention there are costs involved. The children need food, shelter, medical care while they're in my custody. And the placement process requires legal documentation, transportation arrangements. I'm sure you understand. How much? Gideon asked. For a child in the age range you're discussing, I would ask $200. That covers all expenses and ensures the child is legally transferred to your care. $200. More money than most people saw in 6 months, and she said it like it was reasonable. That's quite a sum, Gideon said carefully. Quality care costs money, Mr. Garrett. I could direct you to orphanages that would charge less, but I can't vouch for the condition of their children. Mine are well-fed, healthy, and properly socialized. You get what you pay for. Marisol wanted to reach across the desk and strangle her, wanted to scream that these were human beings, not merchandise. But she forced her face into an expression of thoughtful consideration. We'd need to meet the children first, she said, before making such a significant investment. Something flickered into DeHaven's eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or suspicion. That's not how I typically operate, she said. The children have been through enough upheaval. I don't parade them in front of prospective families like animals at auction. It's degrading. We're not asking for a parade, Jake, Gideon said smoothly. Just a brief meeting. Surely you understand, we want to make sure there's a connection, that we're the right family for whichever child we choose. DeHaven was quiet for a long moment, and Marisol could practically see her weighing options. Turn them away and lose $200? Or allow the meeting and risk what? That they'd recognize something? That the children would say something wrong? Very well, DeHaven said finally. I can arrange for you to meet the children tomorrow. Come back in the morning, say around 10 o'clock. I'll have them cleaned and presentable. Why not today? Marisol asked before she could stop herself. DeHaven's smile went cold. Because I need time to prepare them, Mrs. Garrett. These are frightened, traumatized children. They need to be told what's happening, given time to process. Unless you'd prefer to meet them while they're crying and confused. No, of course not. I'm sorry. Tomorrow is fine. Excellent. DeHaven stood, indicating the meeting was over. I'll see you at 10. Please don't be late. The children's schedules are quite structured. They were escorted back to the buggy by the same guard. Marisol didn't breathe properly until they were through the gate and a quarter-mile down the road. She knows, she said. Yet, she suspects something doesn't mean she knows. Gideon kept the horses at a steady pace, not rushing. We caught her off guard. She wasn't expecting anyone today, which means our story about sending word doesn't hold up if she checks. But she also doesn't want to turn away $200. What if she recognizes me tomorrow? Then we're in trouble. But she only saw you twice, right? And you said you looked different then. I did. I do. Marisol touched her hair, which she'd pinned up this morning in a style she'd never worn before. But if Sophia or Miguel are there, if they see me, they won't recognize you right away either. Kids that age, their sense of time is different. 3 months might as well be 3 years. He glanced at her. You stay calm, stay in character, and we get through this. Then we figure out our next move. They returned the buggy and spent the rest of the day planning. If Sophia and Miguel were among the children presented tomorrow, how would they react? How could they get the kids alone, even for a moment? How could they get everyone out safely? The problem was simple. They had no good answers. By evening, Marisol's nerves were shredded. She paced their tiny room while Gideon sat on the bed cleaning his revolver for the 3rd time. We should have brought help, she said. Hired guns, something. With what money? And who would we trust? Then we should have planned better, found another way in. There is no other way in. The place is fortified. Guards, dogs, weapons. Walking up and asking nicely is the only approach that doesn't end with us dead before we reach the house. She knew he was right. Hated it, but knew it. I can't lose them again, she whispered. If they're there tomorrow, if I see them and then have to walk away, we won't walk away. We'll get them out. He set down the revolver and looked at her directly. But we have to be smart about it. If we try to grab them tomorrow and run, DeHaven's guards will hunt us down before we make it 5 miles. We need a real plan. So what do you suggest? Gideon was quiet for a moment, thinking. We go tomorrow. We meet the children. If yours are there, we act interested but not too eager. We negotiate price, ask about paperwork, play the part of careful buyers. Then we leave, come back to town, and plan the actual extraction. That could take days. Better than getting killed tomorrow. Marisol wanted to argue, but exhaustion had settled into her bones. She sat heavily on the bed next to him. What if this doesn't work? What if we're wrong, and they're not even there? Then we move to the next lead, the 3rd ranch in the mountains. We keep looking until we find them. And if we never do? The question hung between them like smoke. Gideon reached over and took her hand, a simple gesture that somehow felt monumental. Then we die trying, he said quietly, but we don't quit. Not while there's still a chance. She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred, hers rough from months of survival, 2 broken people clinging to each other because the alternative was drowning alone. Thank you, she said again. Stop thanking me. I mean it. I know you do, but I'm not doing this for gratitude. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing, and because I couldn't live with myself if I walked away now. They sat in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Marisol lay down, still fully dressed, and tried to sleep. Gideon stayed sitting, keeping watch even though there was nothing to watch for. Somewhere in the deepest part of the night, she woke to find him lying beside her, finally unconscious. His face looked younger in sleep, less burdened. She wondered what he'd been like before his sister died, before he'd spent months searching for children who couldn't be saved. She wondered if either of them would ever be whole again, or if this kind of damage was permanent. Then exhaustion dragged her back under, and she didn't wonder anything at all. Morning arrived with the inevitability of a death sentence. They dressed in silence, checked weapons, and headed to the livery for another buggy. The same man who'd rented to them yesterday gave them a knowing look but said nothing. The ride to DeHaven's ranch felt both endless and far too short. Marisol's stomach churned. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, so she gripped them together in her lap and tried to breathe normally. The guards at the gate recognized them and waved them through without questions. They were expected this time. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap that was closing with every step. DeHaven met them at the front door herself, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Marisol's entire previous life. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, right on time. Please, come in." She led them through the house to what appeared to be a parlor. 3 children sat on a sofa, hands folded, backs straight. They'd been posed like dolls. Marisol's vision tunneled. The girl on the left was maybe 7, blonde, terrified eyes. Not Sophia. The boy in the middle was dark-haired, small for his age, looking at the floor. Wrong build. Not Miguel. The boy on the right. Time stopped. Brown hair. Thin face. 6 years old, if that. Familiar in a way that made Marisol's heart try to climb out of her throat. Miguel. She knew it with the certainty of her own heartbeat, even though he'd changed, thinner, paler, his hair longer than she'd kept it. But those eyes. Those were her son's eyes, even if they didn't recognize her yet. She couldn't see Sophia. "These are the 3 I mentioned," DeHaven was saying. "The girl is Emma, 7 years old, very obedient. The taller boy is Thomas, 8, and the smaller one is—" She consulted a note. "Peter, age 6. Peter. They'd changed his name. "Where did they come from?" Gideon asked, his voice steady even though Marisol could see tension in his jaw. "Various circumstances. Emma's parents died of cholera. Thomas was abandoned at a church. Peter came to us through an intermediary. Mother couldn't care for him, gave him up willingly." Liar. Vicious, evil liar. "May we speak to them?" Marisol managed. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Briefly. But remember, they're shy. Don't expect much conversation." DeHaven gestured them forward. Marisol approached the sofa on legs that barely supported her weight. Up close, she could see bruises on Emma's arms, half hidden by her sleeves. Thomas had a split lip that looked recent. And Miguel, Peter, had shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Hello," she said softly, crouching to their level. "My name is Mary. This is my husband, James." The children stared at her with empty expressions. They'd been trained not to react, not to speak unless spoken to directly. "Do any of you like animals?" Gideon asked. "Good question." Non-threatening, childlike. Emma nodded slightly. Thomas said nothing. Miguel, Peter, looked up briefly, and Marisol saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition? Or just desperate hope that these strangers might be less cruel than the ones he'd known? "We have a ranch," Marisol continued, fighting to keep her voice from breaking. "Lots of space to run. We have a dog named Sam who loves children." They didn't have a dog. They didn't have a ranch. But the children didn't know that, and the lies came easier than truth in this horrible moment. "Peter," she said, addressing Miguel directly, "do you like dogs?" He met her eyes, and she saw her son looking back at her through layers of fear and caution. For one terrible second, she thought he recognized her, thought he'd cry out, reach for her, blow their cover completely. Instead, he said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I like all animals." It was him. Every instinct she possessed screamed it. The way he tilted his head slightly when he spoke, the little crease between his eyebrows when he was thinking. Those were Miguel's mannerisms, even if his spirit had been beaten down to something unrecognizable. "That's wonderful," she said, and had to look away before tears betrayed her. "Have you made your decision?" DeHaven asked from behind them. Gideon stood, helping Marisol to her feet. "They're all lovely children," he said, "but I think we'd like to discuss it privately before committing. This is a significant decision." DeHaven's expression cooled. "Of course. Though I should mention I have another family coming to visit next week. If you wait too long, your preferred choice may no longer be available. The threat was clear. Decide now or lose your chance." "We'll need to discuss finances as well," Gideon continued, unfazed. 200 is more than we'd budgeted. We may need to arrange additional funds." "I don't negotiate on price, Mr. Garrett. I'm not asking you to. I'm simply saying we need a few days to get our affairs in order." He smiled pleasantly. "Surely you'd prefer buyers who can pay the full amount rather than rushing into something they can't afford?" DeHaven's jaw tightened, but she nodded. 3 days. If I haven't heard from you by then, I'll assume you're no longer interested." Understood. Thank you for your time. They were escorted out again. Marisol managed not to look back at the children, but it took every ounce of self-control she possessed. Miguel was right there, 20 feet away, and she was leaving him. She made it to the buggy before her legs gave out. Gideon caught her, steadying her into the seat. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, moving them away from the ranch at a normal pace. Not fleeing, just leaving. The moment they were out of sight of the house, Marisol doubled over and vomited into the dust. Gideon stopped the buggy and held her hair back while she retched up everything in her stomach. When she finally stopped, he handed her a canteen without comment. "It was him," she gasped. "Miguel, the small one they called Peter." "I know. We have to go back right now. We can't leave him there." "We're not leaving him there, but we're also not going back now." He took the canteen from her shaking hands. There were at least 6 armed men on that property, Marisol, plus DeHaven herself, who probably has a weapon. We go back now, we die. And then Miguel stays lost forever. Then what do we do? We plan. We watch. We figure out the guard rotations, the layout, the best time to move. His voice was steady, grounding. And then we go get your son. What about Sophia? She wasn't there. Doesn't mean she's not on the property. DeHaven only showed us 3 children. There could be more. He started the horses moving again. We get Miguel out. He'll be able to tell us where she is. Kids that age stick together when they can. He'll know. Marisol wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that it would be that simple. But nothing about this had been simple, and she couldn't imagine it starting now. They returned to Bitter Springs and spent the afternoon pretending to be normal people doing normal things. Gideon bought supplies at the general store. Marisol walked around town, memorizing streets and exits. Both of them kept their ears open for useful information. By evening, they'd learned that DeHaven's ranch hands came into town every Thursday to drink and gamble, that the main house had a back entrance used for deliveries, that the dogs on the property were vicious but could be distracted with raw meat, small pieces of a larger puzzle slowly coming together. That night, back in their tiny room, they spread out everything they knew, drew maps from memory, counted guards, estimated timings. "Best bet is during the day," Gideon said. "Night seems safer, but that's when they'll be most alert for intruders. During the day, they're focused on work, keeping the children busy, less likely to notice one person slipping away." "One person?" "I go in. You stay with the buggy, ready to move fast." He held up a hand before she could protest. "You're the one Miguel needs to see when he's safe, not during the extraction. If he sees you and reacts, everyone knows something's wrong. But if a stranger grabs him and drags him out, it just looks like another transfer. I'm not letting you risk your life while I wait in a buggy. And I'm not letting you blow this because you can't control your reaction when you see your son." His voice was firm. "I know it's hard, but this is the smart play." She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream that he didn't understand, that he couldn't possibly know what it felt like to be this close and still held back. But when she looked at his face, she saw the ghosts of his own lost children looking back at her. He understood better than anyone. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "But if something goes wrong, you drive like hell and don't look back. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are. Because getting yourself killed doesn't help Miguel." He met her eyes. "Promise me, Marisol. If this goes bad, you save yourself and the boy. Let me worry about me." She didn't want to promise that. Didn't want to imagine a world where she drove away and left Gideon behind to whatever horrible fate awaited him. But she also knew he wouldn't go through with the plan unless she agreed. "I promise," she lied. He probably knew it was a lie, but he nodded anyway, accepting it because they both needed to believe they'd all make it out alive. They spent the next 2 days watching the ranch from a distance, noting patterns. Guards changed shifts every 8 hours. The children were brought outside for work twice a day, morning and mid-afternoon. DeHaven herself left the property every other day around noon, presumably to conduct business in town. Thursday arrived too fast. The day they'd chosen. The day DeHaven would be gone, the ranch hands would be tired from a night of drinking, and the afternoon work shift would put Miguel outside where Gideon could reach him. They drove to within half a mile of the ranch and left the buggy hidden in a stand of trees. Gideon checked his weapons one final time while Marisol tried to remember how to breathe. "I'll be back with him in under an hour," he said. If I'm not back in 90 minutes, assume something went wrong and go. Gideon, no arguments, we agreed. He touched her face briefly, a gesture so unexpected that Marisol froze. I'll get him back. I promise. Then he was gone, moving through the brush toward the ranch with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this before. Marisol waited, watched the sun track across the sky, counted her heartbeats because it was better than counting minutes. Somewhere on that ranch, her son was working, hauling water or mucking stalls or performing whatever other labor DeHaven had forced on him. And he had no idea that in a few minutes, everything was about to change. She prayed. To anyone listening, to the indifferent sky, to the cruel universe that had taken so much already, that when it changed, it would be for the better. That this time, just this once, the gamble would pay off. That she'd see her son's face again before this day ended. The minutes crawled past like wounded animals. Marisol's hands ached from gripping the reins too hard. Her eyes burned from staring at the horizon, waiting for Gideon to appear. 50 minutes. An hour. 70 minutes. Then, in the distance, movement. 2 figures running through the brush. One tall, one small. Marisol's heart nearly exploded. She grabbed the rifle, ready to lay down covering fire if needed. The figures came closer, and she could make out details now. Gideon carrying something. No, carrying someone. A child. Miguel. They burst from the brush 30 yards away, Gideon running flat out with Miguel clutched against his chest. Behind them, shouts, men on horses gaining ground. Marisol didn't think, just raised the rifle and fired 3 shots in rapid succession toward the pursuers. Didn't try to hit anyone, just wanted them to slow down, take cover, buy Gideon precious seconds. It worked. The riders pulled up, looking for the source of the gunfire. Gideon reached the buggy and practically threw Miguel into the back. Go! Marisol snapped the reins hard. The horses lunged forward, and the buggy jolted into motion. More gunfire behind them. Something cracked past her head, too close. Gideon twisted around, firing his revolver back at their pursuers. Miguel was crying in the back, a high keening sound that tore at Marisol's heart. But she couldn't look at him, couldn't comfort him, could only drive, whipping the horses into a gallop that would break the buggy's axles if they hit the wrong rut. The pursuing riders fell back, not because they'd given up, but because Gideon's return fire had forced them to choose between catching prey and staying alive. They'd regroup. They'd come after them. But for now, they had distance. Marisol drove until the horses were foaming and stumbling. Then she pulled off the main road into heavy brush, found a depression that might hide the buggy from casual view, and finally let herself look back. Miguel huddled in this corner of the buggy bed, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at her with eyes that didn't recognize anything except fear. "Miguel," she whispered. He flinched, and Marisol realized with horror that getting him back might have been the easy part. Marisol stayed frozen, staring at her son, who stared back like she was just another threat in a world made of them. The silence stretched unbearable and sharp until Gideon's voice cut through. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. He was reloading his revolver with hands that shook slightly. "They'll track us. We need to move." "He doesn't know me," Marisol whispered. "He's terrified. Give him time." Gideon climbed into the back of the buggy, keeping his movement slow and unthreatening. "Hey, kid. I know you're scared, but we're not going to hurt you. We're going to keep you safe, all right?" Miguel pressed himself harder into the corner. His eyes darted between them, looking for exits, calculating whether he could run. "Miguel," Marisol tried again, softer this time. "It's me. It's Mama." Something flickered in his face. Confusion, maybe, or hope that had been beaten down so many times it didn't trust itself anymore. "They said you were dead," he whispered. The words punched the air from Marisol's lungs. "What?" "Mrs. DeHaven said you died. That you didn't want us anymore, so you died." His voice cracked. "She said we had to forget you." Rage bloomed white-hot in Marisol's chest, but she forced it down. This wasn't the time. "I didn't die, baby. I've been looking for you. For 3 months I've been searching. I never stopped. Not for one day." "But they said—" "They lied." She moved slowly toward him, telegraphing every motion. "Everything they told you was a lie. Your name isn't Peter. It's Miguel. Miguel Kane. And I'm your mother." He watched her approach like a rabbit watching a coyote. When she got within arm's reach, she stopped and simply held out her hand. "You don't have to believe me yet," she said, "but I need you to trust me long enough to get us somewhere safe. Can you do that?" Miguel looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and took it. His fingers were so small. She'd forgotten how small they were. "We need to go," Gideon said again. "They'll have riders out looking. Every minute we sit here is a minute closer to getting caught." Marisol climbed back to the driver's seat, and this time Miguel came with her instead of staying in the back. He sat pressed against her side, still not entirely convinced but willing to take the risk. It was more than she'd dared hope for. They drove hard for the next 2 hours, staying off main roads and pushing through terrain that threatened to shake the buggy apart. Miguel didn't speak. He just held on to Marisol's arm with both hands and watched the landscape pass like he was memorizing escape routes. Finally, as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Gideon called for a halt. They were miles from anywhere, surrounded by rock formations and scrub brush that all looked identical. Good for hiding, bad for everything else. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "No fire, cold food. We take turns on watch." "What about Sophia?" Marisol asked. The question had been burning in her throat since they'd fled the ranch. "Miguel, was there a girl with you? 8 years old, brown hair, her name might have been changed." "Sophia," Miguel said, his first word since revealing what DeHaven had told him. "They didn't change her name. She's still Sophia." Relief and terror warred in Marisol's chest. "Where is she?" "Different place. They moved her 2 weeks ago." He looked up at Marisol, and his eyes were older than any 6-year-old's should be. "She fought too much. Hit one of the guards. They said she needed to learn respect." "Where did they take her?" Gideon asked. "I don't know. They don't tell us things." Miguel's voice got smaller. "But I heard the guards talking. Something about mountains. A place where the difficult ones go. The third ranch. The one in the mountains west of Tucson that Rosa couldn't name." "Did they say anything else?" Marisol pressed. "Anything about how to find it?" Miguel shook his head. "Just that it was far, and that kids who go there don't usually come back." The words settled over them like a shroud. Marisol looked at Gideon and saw her own fear reflected back at her. "We'll find it," he said, but his voice carried doubt he couldn't quite hide. "We found Miguel. We'll find her too." They made camp as the light failed, eating jerky and hardtack, while Miguel wolfed down more food than Marisol would have thought his small stomach could hold. She wanted to tell him to slow down, that he'd make himself sick, but she couldn't bring herself to deny him anything after what he'd been through. When he finally stopped eating, he curled up against her side and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into sleep, or what passed for it. Every few minutes, he'd jerk and whimper, clearly trapped in nightmares. "Tell me what happened," Marisol said quietly to Gideon. "When you went in." He was sitting a few feet away, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. "Found him mucking out stalls like you predicted, grabbed him, told him to stay quiet, and ran. Simple as that." "Nothing about this is simple." "No, it's not." He shifted and she heard his joints crack. "One of the guards saw us leaving, fired a shot that spooked the horses. That's when the others started chasing." "You could have been killed." "Yeah, could have been." He looked at her, his face barely visible in the starlight. "Worth it, though. Look at him." Marisol looked down at Miguel, who had grabbed a fistful of her shirt in his sleep like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. "Now we just need to find Sophia," she said. "Mountains west of Tucson. That narrows it down to maybe 300 square miles of territory." Gideon's voice was flat. "Could take months to search it all. And that's assuming DeHaven doesn't move her again once she realizes we got Miguel. So what do you suggest?" "We make DeHaven tell us where Sophia is." Marisol stared at him. "How?" "We go back. We take the fight to her instead of running." He met her eyes. "She's got what we want. We've got something she wants now, too." "Miguel?" "No. Information. We know her operation. We know the ranches. We know the buyers." His voice was low and dangerous. "We threaten to expose everything. Send letters to territorial authorities, newspapers, anyone who'll listen. Force her hand. She'll just have us killed. Maybe. Or maybe she'll negotiate. Give us Sophia in exchange for our silence." He leaned forward. "It's a risk, But it's better than wandering the mountains for months while your daughter gets moved somewhere we'll never find. Miguel stirred against Marisol's side, and she automatically began stroking his hair, soothing him back toward deeper sleep. The motion was instinctive, 3 months of separation erased in a single gesture. "All right," she said. "We try it your way, but if it goes wrong, I know. We improvise." He almost smiled. "We've gotten pretty good at that." They took watches through the night. When Marisol's turn came, she sat with Miguel's head in her lap and watched the stars wheel overhead, feeling the weight of everything they still had to do pressing down like a physical force. She'd gotten one child back. The universe owed her nothing more, but she was going to take it anyway. Morning brought the reality of traveling with a traumatized child who'd spent 3 months being told his mother was dead. Miguel woke confused about where he was, convinced briefly that the previous day had been a dream. When he saw Marisol, relief and fear crossed his face in equal measure. "It's real," she told him. "You're safe. I've got you." He nodded but didn't speak. Just accepted the food Gideon offered and ate mechanically, like he'd learned not to waste energy on things that didn't matter. They couldn't risk going back to Bitter Springs. DeHaven's people would be watching. Instead, they skirted the town entirely and headed southeast, staying to routes that barely qualified as trails. "Where are we going?" Miguel asked. His first full sentence of the day. "Somewhere we can plan," Marisol said. "Somewhere safe." "Nowhere safe." The flatness in his voice broke her heart. "It will be. I promise." He didn't argue, but she could see he didn't believe her either. 6-year-olds shouldn't have that kind of cynicism embedded in them. Shouldn't know that promises were just words adults used before breaking them. They found an abandoned line shack 2 days later, half collapsed but still offering shelter. Gideon checked it thoroughly for snakes and scorpions before declaring it usable. They moved the buggy close and settled in to wait out the immediate heat of pursuit. Over the next few days, Miguel slowly began to thaw. Small things, barely noticeable at first. He started speaking in full sentences instead of single words, started asking questions instead of just accepting whatever happened to him, started looking at Marisol like he was allowing himself to believe she might actually be his mother. The breakthrough came on the 4th night. Marisol woke to find Miguel crying silently beside her, tears streaming down his face in the moonlight. "Hey," she whispered, pulling him close. "What's wrong?" "I forgot," he choked out. "I forgot what you look like. They said you were dead, and I tried to remember your face, and I couldn't. I forgot you." "Oh, baby, that's not your fault. You didn't forget me. Your brain was just trying to protect you from hurting too much." "But I should have remembered. Sophia remembered. She said she'd never forget, not ever, and she got mad at me when I couldn't remember anymore." Marisol held him tighter. "Is that why they moved her? Because she wouldn't forget?" Miguel nodded against her chest. "She kept saying you'd come for us. Mrs. DeHaven said she was being difficult, that she needed to learn the truth." He pulled back, looking up at Marisol with eyes that had seen far too much. "But Sophia was right. You did come. Always. I will always come for you." She wiped his tears with her thumbs. "And we're going to get your sister back too. I don't care what it takes. She's far away. Then we'll go far." "They have guns. So do we. They'll hurt you. They can try." She made her voice firm, certain. "Miguel, listen to me. Those people took you because they thought I was weak. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. Do you understand?" He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're scary when you're angry." She huffed something that might have been a laugh. "Yeah, I really am." He settled back against her, and this time when he slept, the nightmares seemed less intense. Gideon had watched the whole exchange from where he sat keeping watch. When Marisol met his eyes, he nodded once. Approval, maybe. Or just acknowledgement that she was doing the best anyone could. In the morning, they began planning in earnest. Gideon pulled out paper and started making notes while Miguel drew pictures in the dirt. Rough maps of the ranch where he'd been held, marking where guards stood, where the other children slept, what the daily routine looked like. "There were 11 other kids when I was there," Miguel said, his stick scratching patterns in the dust. "Some of them had been there a long time, months maybe. Emma said she'd been there since winter." "What happened to children who got sold?" Marisol asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "They just disappeared. The guards would take them away and we'd never see them again." He looked up. Mrs. DeHaven said they went to good families. But Thomas said that was a lie. He said they went to work. Thomas was right, Gideon said quietly. Did any of the children talk about where they came from, how they ended up there? Miguel thought about it. Emma's mama died. She didn't have anyone else. Thomas got lost in Tucson, and the marshal put him in an orphanage, but then Mrs. DeHaven came and said she'd find him a home. The others, he trailed off. They didn't talk about it much. Talking about before made the guards angry. They spent hours piecing together information, building a picture of DeHaven's operation that was even worse than Marisol had imagined. The woman had been doing this for years, moving children through multiple ranches, selling them to buyers across the territory and beyond. Some went to families who genuinely wanted children. Those were the lucky ones. Most went to ranches, mines, factories, places that needed small hands and didn't care about labor laws. We need leverage, Gideon said finally. Something that forces DeHaven to deal with us instead of just hunting us down. Like what? Names, records, proof of what she's doing. He tapped the paper. Miguel, did you ever see Mrs. DeHaven writing in a book? A ledger, maybe? In her office, she kept it locked in a desk. What else was in the office? Miguel scrunched his face, thinking. Papers. A lot of papers. And a safe in the wall behind a painting. Gideon and Marisol exchanged glances. That's where she keeps the real records, Gideon said. Names of buyers, amounts paid, everything she'd need to defend herself if someone accused her. Which means it's also everything we'd need to threaten her with, Marisol finished. But how do we get into that office without getting killed? We don't. Not directly. Gideon leaned back, thinking. But what if we didn't need to? What if we just needed DeHaven to believe we already have the records? Bluffing. Bluffing, he agreed. We send her a message. Tell her we have copies of her ledgers, and we're prepared to send them to every newspaper and lawman in the territory, unless she returns Sophia safely. She'll know we're lying, maybe, but she can't afford to take that risk. Her whole operation depends on staying quiet. If authorities start investigating, even if they're friendly to her, it draws attention. Buyers get nervous. Money dries up. He met Marisol's eyes. We don't need to destroy her. We just need to scare her enough that giving up one child seems like the easier option. It was risky. More than risky. Borderline insane. But Marisol couldn't think of anything better. How do we send the message? She asked. Carefully, through an intermediary, someone who can't be traced back to us. Gideon stood, pacing. There's got to be someone in Bitter Springs who's not on DeHaven's payroll, someone who'd be willing to carry a letter for the right price. They spent another day working out details. The message needed to be specific enough to be credible, but vague enough not to reveal they were bluffing. It needed to give DeHaven a way to respond without exposing them to ambush. Miguel listened to all of this with the focused attention of someone who'd learned that survival meant understanding the adults around you. When they asked his opinion on how DeHaven might react, he thought carefully before answering. She gets really angry when people don't do what she says, he offered. But she's also afraid of losing money. When one of the buyers said he wouldn't pay full price, she yelled at him, but then she made a deal. Maybe if you make it about money, she'll deal. Smart kid. Marisol felt pride swell in her chest despite the circumstances. 2 days later, Gideon rode into a small settlement called Red Rock, far enough from Bitter Springs that DeHaven's influence should be minimal. He found a teenager willing to carry a letter to DeHaven's ranch for $5, a fortune to a kid who probably didn't earn that much in a month. The letter was simple, direct. It claimed they had full documentation of DeHaven's operation and would deliver it to authorities in 1 week unless Sophia Kane was returned unharmed to a specified location. It provided a drop point for DeHaven's response, a hollow tree 2 miles from the ranch, and made clear that any attempt to follow or capture them would result in immediate exposure. It was signed with no name, just a simple statement, the people who take children back. Now they had to wait. Waiting was torture. They stayed hidden in the line shack, taking turns keeping watch and trying not to imagine all the ways this could fail. Miguel grew restless, unused to inactivity after months of constant labor. Marisol found herself telling him stories to pass the time, making up adventures about brave children who outsmarted villains, always with happy endings that felt like lies. On the 3rd day, Gideon went to check the hollow tree. He returned an hour later with a folded piece of paper. Marisol's hand shook as she opened it. The handwriting was precise, controlled, feminine. You have made a serious mistake. The child you mention is no longer in my custody, and I cannot return what I do not possess. However, I am willing to negotiate for the return of the records you claim to have stolen. Name your price. She's lying, Marisol said immediately. She still has Sophia. She's trying to negotiate. Maybe. Or maybe she's telling the truth and Sophia really was moved. Gideon read over her shoulder. Either way, she's willing to deal. That's something. What do we do? We push harder. Call her bluff if it is one. Demand proof that Sophia isn't in her custody. He took the letter, studying it. And we raise the stakes. Make it clear we're not interested in money. We want the girl, or we burn her operation to the ground. They sent another letter. This one was harsher, more direct. It demanded photographic proof that Sophia was no longer at DeHaven's ranch within 2 days. Or they would begin sending documentation to authorities, starting with the territorial marshal in Tucson. The response came faster this time. Just 1 day. The girl is at the mountain facility. I can arrange her transfer to a neutral location, but it will take time. 3 weeks minimum. If you expose my operation, you ensure she will never be found. Cooperate, and we all get what we want. 3 weeks. Might as well be 3 years. Anything could happen in that time. DeHaven could move Sophia somewhere unreachable, or worse. But they also didn't have better options. What if we just go to the mountain facility ourselves? Marisol suggested. Miguel said it's west of Tucson. We start searching. We'll find it eventually. Hundreds of square miles of mountains, Gideon reminded her. It could take months, and that's assuming we don't get shot by ranchers who don't appreciate strangers wandering their land. So we just wait? Trust DeHaven to keep her word? No. We use the 3 weeks to prepare. He pulled out the map again. We take DeHaven's offer, tell her we agree to wait. But while we're waiting, we search, we ask questions. We narrow down where this mountain facility might be. And if 3 weeks pass and she hasn't delivered Sophia, we already know where to go. It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan. They sent a third letter agreeing to the 3-week timeline, but demanding weekly proof that Sophia remained alive and unharmed. DeHaven agreed. The first proof arrived 6 days later, a photograph of Sophia standing in front of a stone building, holding a newspaper dated from that week. She looked thinner, harder, but alive. Marisol stared at the image until she'd memorized every detail, every shadow. "We're coming," she whispered to the photograph. "Just hold on a little longer." They used the time to search. Gideon made trips to nearby towns, asking careful questions about ranches in the mountains. Miguel stayed with Marisol, and slowly, painfully slowly, he began to heal. The nightmares lessened. His appetite returned. He started playing again, small games with rocks and sticks that reminded Marisol of who he'd been before all this. One afternoon, while Gideon was away gathering information, Miguel looked up from the fort he was building and asked the question Marisol had been dreading. "Mama, why did they take us?" She set down the shirt she'd been mending. "Because there are bad people in the world who care more about money than about doing what's right." "But why us? We didn't do anything wrong." "No, baby, you didn't. This wasn't your fault. None of it." She pulled him close. "Sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason. That's how the world works sometimes." "That's not fair." "No, it's really not." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Are you going to leave again? After we get Sophia?" The question stabbed straight through her. "Never. I am never leaving you again. You understand? Never." "You promise?" She thought about all the promises that had been broken in his short life, all the lies he'd been told, and she made her voice as certain as stone. "I promise. When we get Sophia back, we're going to find somewhere safe, somewhere far away from all of this, and we're going to be a family again. You, me, and Sophia. Nothing is going to separate us. Not ever." Miguel nodded against her chest. "Okay, I believe you." Those 3 words meant more than he could possibly know. The second photograph arrived on schedule. Sophia, alive, holding another dated newspaper. The third came a week later. Each one showed her in a different location within what appeared to be the same compound, proving she was still there, still accessible. Gideon's searching had narrowed the location to a specific range of mountains about 40 miles west of Tucson. 3 different sources had mentioned a ranch high up in rough country, run by a man named Fletcher who did business with DeHaven. The same Fletcher Rosa had warned them about, the mean drunk who liked hurting people. "We're running out of time," Marisol said on the 18th day. "Even if DeHaven follows through, we should scout the location. Be ready if something goes wrong." "Agreed. But we can't take Miguel with us into dangerous territory." "I'm not leaving him anywhere." "I'm not suggesting you leave him. I'm suggesting one of us stays with him while the other scouts." Gideon met her eyes. "You or me? Choose." It was an impossible choice. Trust someone else to find her daughter, or leave her son when she'd just gotten him back. "I'll go," she said finally. "You stay with Miguel." "You sure?" "No. But you're better with him than I am. He trusts you." The admission hurt, but it was true. Miguel had bonded with Gideon during the rescue, saw him as a protector. And I need to see where Sophia is with my own eyes. Need to know the terrain, the guards, everything. Gideon nodded slowly. "All right. But you take the rifle and you promise me you'll be careful. Scouting only. No heroics." "No heroics," she agreed. She left the next morning before Miguel woke, unable to face saying goodbye to him. Gideon promised to explain, to keep him safe, to be ready to move the moment she returned. The ride into the mountains took 2 days. The terrain got rougher with every mile. Narrow trails, steep climbs, vegetation that grabbed at her clothes like it wanted to drag her back. Several times she had to dismount and lead the horse through passages barely wide enough for both of them. She found the ranch on the 3rd day, tucked into a valley so remote it might as well have been on another planet. The compound was smaller than DeHaven's main operation, but more fortified. Stone buildings instead of wood, high walls, armed men walking patrols. And in a courtyard visible from her vantage point, children, maybe a dozen of them, working under guard. Marisol scanned their faces desperately, and her heart nearly stopped when she found what she was looking for. Sophia. Alive. Thinner and harder like the photographs suggested, but unmistakably her daughter. She was hauling water from a well, struggling with the weight, but refusing to quit. That was her girl. Stubborn to the bone. Marisol watched for hours, noting everything, guard rotations, entry points, where the children slept, when they were moved. She sketched rough maps, counted weapons, memorized faces, and she started planning how to get her daughter out of there. Because one thing had become crystal clear, DeHaven was never going to hand Sophia over willingly. The 3 weeks was a stalling tactic, nothing more. Maybe to buy time to move Sophia somewhere even more remote, or maybe just to lull Marisol into trusting long enough to set up an ambush. Either way, waiting was off the table. Marisol headed back to the line shack, her mind racing with strategies. They'd need a distraction, something to pull the guards away from the children. They'd need to move at night, probably. They'd need to be ready to fight their way out, if it came to that. She reached the line shack at dusk on the 6th day and found Gideon teaching Miguel how to properly clean a rifle. The domestic scene, the deadly weapon, and the teaching, and the small boy's focused concentration summed up their entire situation in one image. "Well?" Gideon asked. "I found her, and we're not waiting for DeHaven." Marisol dismounted, every muscle screaming. "We're going in ourselves." Miguel looked up. "When?" She met his eyes. Her son who'd survived 3 months of hell and come out the other side still fighting. Soon. Very soon. Because her children had waited long enough. And Marisol Kane was done playing by anyone's rules but her own. They spent 2 days planning the extraction with the kind of detail that came from knowing there wouldn't be a second chance. Marisol drew maps in the dirt while Gideon calculated timing, and Miguel, his small face serious beyond his years, pointed out where the guards tended to cluster during evening routines. "Fletcher drinks after dinner," Miguel said. He was sitting cross-legged, arranging rocks to represent buildings. "He gets mean when he drinks, so the other guards try to stay away from him. That's when they're least organized." "How do you know about Fletcher?" Marisol asked carefully. "He came to Mrs. DeHaven's ranch once. Hit Thomas so hard he couldn't hear right for 3 days. Miguel's voice was flat, reciting facts. "Sophia told me if I ever saw Fletcher again, I should run and hide. She said he was worse than the others." Gideon and Marisol exchanged dark looks. The man they were planning to confront wasn't just dangerous. He was cruel in ways that went beyond profit or business. "We'll be careful," Gideon said. And if we can avoid Fletcher entirely, we will. But they all knew avoiding him was unlikely. From what Marisol had observed, Fletcher ran the mountain compound personally. Getting Sophia out meant going through him one way or another. The plan they settled on was simple because complicated plans fell apart under pressure. They'd approach at dusk when the light was failing, but guards were still confident enough not to be on highest alert. Gideon would create a distraction on the south side of the compound, a small fire in the brush, nothing huge but enough to draw attention. While guards responded, Marisol would slip in from the north, locate Sophia among the children, and get her out through a gap in the wall she'd spotted during her scouting. Miguel would stay hidden a mile away with the horses and supplies, ready to run if neither adult returned by dawn. "I don't like that part," Miguel said when they explained it. "The part where I run without you." "If we don't come back, it means something went wrong," Marisol told him gently. "And if that happens, you need to survive. Get to a town, find people who'll help. Tell them everything you know about Mrs. DeHaven and Fletcher. But no arguments, baby. This is the deal. You stay safe no matter what." She cupped his face in her hands. "Promise me." He didn't want to. She could see the refusal building in his eyes. But finally he nodded, jaw tight with frustration and fear. They left the line shack before dawn on the third day, pushing hard to reach the mountains by nightfall. The terrain fought them the whole way. Loose rock that made the horses stumble, heat that sucked moisture from their bodies faster than they could replace it, and a constant anxiety that they were already too late, that Sophia had been moved again, that this entire desperate gamble was for nothing. But when they finally reached the ridge overlooking the compound as the sun began its descent, Marisol spotted children in the courtyard, and her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "There," she whispered, pointing. "Third from the left. That's her." Gideon pulled out a small telescope they'd bought in Red Rock and studied the scene. "You're sure? I'd know my daughter anywhere." He handed her the telescope. Through the lens, Sophia jumped into sharp focus. She looked like she'd aged a year and 3 months. Harder angles to her face, a wariness in how she held herself. But she was alive and whole and right there. They waited for full dusk. Miguel had already been settled in the hiding spot with strict instructions not to move unless he heard 3 gunshots in rapid succession, their signal that everything had gone wrong. He'd hugged Marisol so tight she thought her ribs might crack, then turned to Gideon and said simply, "Bring my sister home." "We will," Gideon promised. One way or another. Now crouched in the brush as shadows lengthened across the compound, Marisol checked her weapons for the 5th time. Revolver loaded, knife strapped to her calf, spare ammunition in her pocket. She'd never imagined becoming the kind of person who carried weapons as casually as other women carried sewing needles, but the territory had a way of changing people whether they wanted to change or not. "Ready?" Gideon asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." He squeezed her shoulder once, brief contact that carried more weight than words, then headed south to set his fire. Marisol watched him disappear into the brush and tried not to think about all the ways this could fail. She counted to 300 like they'd agreed, giving Gideon time to get in position. Then she started her approach, moving low and slow through terrain that offered minimal cover. Every sound seemed amplified. Her breathing, the scrape of her boots on rock, the hammer of her pulse in her ears. The north wall loomed ahead, 8 feet of stacked stone that looked solid, until you noticed the section where weather and poor construction had created a gap just wide enough for a determined adult to squeeze through. Marisol had found it during her scouting, a flaw that might have been deliberate, some builder's small rebellion against Fletcher's cruelty, or just incompetence. Either way, it was her entrance. She was 10 yards from the wall when shouting erupted from the south side of the compound. Gideon's fire had caught. Guards ran past her position toward the commotion, and Marisol used the noise to cover her final approach. She reached the wall and pressed herself against it, breathing hard, listening. More shouting. Someone yelling for water. Fletcher's voice cutting through the chaos, ordering people around with the casual violence of someone who expected obedience. Marisol found the gap and started working her way through. The stones scraped her shoulders and hips, and for one terrible moment she thought she'd gotten stuck. But she twisted, exhaled completely, and forced herself through into the compound. She was in. The children's quarters were across a courtyard and up 3 steps into what had once been a storage building. Marisol had watched the evening routine enough times to know the pattern. Children brought in from work, fed a thin dinner, locked in for the night. Right now they should be at dinner, which meant the building would be empty. She moved fast, keeping to shadows, avoiding the main areas where guards congregated. The storage building door was secured with a simple latch, no lock. She eased it open and slipped inside. 12 bedrolls on the floor, a single bucket in the corner that served as a latrine. Nothing else. No toys, no personal belongings, nothing that acknowledged these were human children who deserved even minimal comfort. Rage threatened to swamp her, but she pushed it down. Later. She could be angry later. She positioned herself behind the door and waited. Voices approached maybe 10 minutes later, children's voices, quiet and subdued. The door opened and they filed in one by one, not talking, not playing, just finding their bedrolls and sitting with the exhausted resignation of people much older than their years. Sophia came in last. She was talking to another girl, her voice low but intense. "I'm telling you, something's happening. The guards are distracted. If we're going to try, it has to be tonight." "They'll catch us," the other girl whispered. "They always catch us." "Not if we're smart. Not if—" Sophia stopped dead when she saw Marisol step out from behind the door. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Sophia's eyes went wide, her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. "Sophia," Marisol whispered. Her daughter's face crumpled. "Mama?" Then Sophia was across the room, slamming into Marisol with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. She grabbed onto her mother and made a sound that was half sob, half gasp, like she'd been holding her breath for 3 months and could finally let it out. "You're real," Sophia choked out. "You're real. You're here. You came. I came." "Of course I came." Marisol held her daughter tight enough to hurt, breathing in the smell of her, dirt and sweat, and something that was uniquely Sophia underneath it all. "I've been looking for you since the day they took you. I never stopped." The other children had frozen, staring at this impossible scene. One of them, a boy maybe 9 years old, edged toward the door like he was thinking about calling for guards. "Don't," Sophia said, her voice sharp. She pulled back from Marisol just enough to look at the others. "This is my mother. She's here to get me out. If any of you say a word to Fletcher, I swear I'll haunt you for the rest of your miserable lives." "We can't all go," the girl from before said. "Even if we wanted to, there's too many of us. We'd get caught." "Then you stay," Sophia shot back. "But I'm leaving." Marisol looked at the faces staring back at her. Children who'd given up hope so thoroughly they couldn't even recognize rescue when it stood in front of them. She thought about the kids at Diamond Creek, the ones she and Gideon had promised to come back for. About all the children trapped in this network, being sold and worked and broken. "Anyone who wants to come can come," she heard herself say. "But you have to move fast and stay quiet. No guarantees we all make it, but I promise I'll try." They looked at each other, silently debating. Finally, 3 of them stood. Sophia, the girl she'd been talking to, and a small boy who couldn't have been more than 5. "Everyone else?" Marisol asked. The remaining children shook their heads, too scared or too beaten down to take the risk. Marisol wanted to argue, wanted to force them to understand this might be their only chance, but she didn't have time. "If anyone asks, you were asleep and didn't see anything. Understand?" They nodded, and Marisol chose to believe them. She led her small group toward the door, but before they reached it, heavy footsteps approached from outside. Everyone froze. The door slammed open and Fletcher filled the frame. He was exactly as Miguel had described, big, mean-looking, with the eyes of someone who enjoyed causing pain. He took in the scene with one sweep of his gaze. "Well," he said slowly, "what do we have here?" Marisol's hand dropped to her revolver, but Fletcher was faster. He had a gun out and pointed at her before she'd cleared leather. "I wouldn't," he said pleasantly, "unless you want these children to see your brains on the wall." She froze. Behind her, Sophia made a small sound of fear. Fletcher smiled. "Mrs. DeHaven said you might try something stupid. Sent word yesterday that if anyone suspicious showed up, I should handle it personal. Lucky me." He gestured with the gun. "Out. All of you. Let's go have a conversation." They filed out into the courtyard. The fire on the south wall had been extinguished, and guards were returning to their positions. Marisol spotted Gideon being marched toward them at gunpoint, blood running from a cut above his eye. Their eyes met across the courtyard. He looked furious with himself, like he'd failed some fundamental test. She tried to tell him with her expression that it wasn't his fault, that they'd both known the risks, but she didn't know if the message landed. Fletcher herded them all together, Marisol, Gideon, Sophia, and the two other children who'd tried to escape. The rest of the guards formed a loose circle around them, rifles ready. So, Fletcher said, settling back against a water trough like he had all the time in the world. You're the famous mother I've heard about, the one who's been causing Mrs. DeHaven all this trouble. Marisol didn't respond. She was calculating distances, angles, odds, all of them terrible. Got to admire the persistence, Fletcher continued. Most folks would have given up by now, but not you. You just keep coming back like a dog that don't know when it's beat. He tilted his head. Question is, what do I do with you now? Let them go, Gideon said. You've got us. There's no need to involve the children further. Fletcher laughed. Oh, I don't think so. See, these children are inventory, property, and you two just tried to steal property. That's a hanging offense in most places. He pulled out a knife and began cleaning his fingernails with it. But I'm feeling generous. Mrs. DeHaven wants you alive so she can handle you personally. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to tie you up real nice, send word to her that we got you, and wait for instructions. Shouldn't take more than a week or so. A week? They'd be dead long before that. Fletcher would get drunk and decide they weren't worth the trouble of keeping alive. Or DeHaven would send word to kill them. Either way, this was the end unless Marisol found a way to change the equation. She met Sophia's eyes. Her daughter was terrified, but also angry. That particular cane stubbornness that refused to bend even when bending was the smart choice. The same stubbornness that had gotten Sophia labeled as difficult and moved to this remote compound in the first place. And looking at her daughter, Marisol made a decision. Maybe the wrong one, probably the last one she'd ever make, but a decision nonetheless. Sophia, she said quietly, when I move, you run. Don't look back. Just run. Mama, no. Now ain't that touching, Fletcher interrupted. Mother-daughter bonding right before I... Marisol drew her revolver and shot him. Not a kill shot. She was off balance and rushed, and the bullet caught him in the shoulder instead of center mass. But it was enough to drop him, enough to create chaos. Guards raised their rifles but hesitated, not wanting to hit Fletcher. Gideon used the confusion to tackle the nearest guard, wrestling for his weapon. And Marisol grabbed Sophia with one hand and fired twice more at the guards, not aiming, just creating noise and terror. Run! She screamed. They ran. Sophia, the other girl, the small boy, all of them sprinting for the gap in the north wall while bullets tore the air around them. Marisol covered their retreat, firing until her revolver clicked empty, then drawing her knife because it was all she had left. A guard lunged at her. She sidestepped and drove the knife up under his ribs, feeling it scrape bone. He went down choking. She grabbed his rifle and kept moving, shooting at anything that moved toward the fleeing children. Gideon was still fighting, surrounded by 3 guards but refusing to go down. Marisol shot one of them in the leg, giving Gideon space to break free. Go, he shouted at her. Get them out! She hesitated for one terrible second, torn between helping him and protecting the children. Then Sophia screamed from somewhere ahead, and the choice was made. Marisol ran toward the north wall. She found Sophia and the other children struggling through the gap. Too slow, too exposed. Guards were recovering from the initial shock and taking aim. She threw herself in front of the children and fired the rifle at anyone who looked like a threat. Something hot punched her side. A bullet, she realized distantly, but there was no pain yet, just impact and wetness spreading under her shirt. Keep going! She shouted at Sophia. They squeezed through the gap one by one. Marisol went last, dragging herself through even as hands grabbed at her boots. She kicked hard, felt something crunch, and then she was free and running into the darkness with children beside her. Behind them, gunfire continued. Gideon's voice rose in wordless rage, then cut off abruptly. No, Marisol whispered, but she couldn't stop. Couldn't go back. Could only run with her daughter's hand clutched in hers and hope that Gideon was strong enough, smart enough, lucky enough to survive what she'd left him to face. They ran until the children couldn't run anymore, then walked, then stumbled. The small boy was crying quietly. The other girl kept looking back like she expected guards to materialize from the darkness. And Sophia held on to Marisol's hand with crushing grip and didn't say a word. They found Miguel where they'd left him, and his face transformed from terror to joy to confusion when he saw his sister, but not Gideon. "Where is he?" Miguel asked. "Still back there, fighting." Marisol's side was on fire now, the adrenaline fading enough to let pain through. "We need to move. Get distance before they organize a pursuit." "You're bleeding," Sophia said, noticing the dark stain spreading across Marisol's shirt. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're—" "Later, baby. We'll deal with it later." Marisol hauled herself onto one of the horses, every movement in agony. "Right now, we ride." They rode through the night, pushing the horses harder than was safe, but not having a choice. The two extra children rode double with Sophia and Miguel, all of them clinging on like their lives depended on it. Because they did. Marisol kept expecting to hear pursuit behind them, kept waiting for the moment when Fletcher's men caught up and finished what they'd started. But the night remained quiet except for the sound of hooves on stone and her own labored breathing. When dawn broke gray and cold, they were 20 miles from the compound, and the horses were done. Marisol slid from the saddle and immediately collapsed, her legs refusing to hold her weight anymore. Sophia was there instantly, trying to help her up, but Marisol waved her off. "I need to see the wound. Help me get the shirt off." What they found underneath wasn't good. The bullet had punched through the meat of her side, missing anything vital but leaving a channel that bled sluggishly. Sophia tore strips from her own shirt, threadbare and filthy, but all they had, and packed the wound while Marisol bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. "We need to get you to a doctor," Sophia said. "No doctors. Anyone we go to will ask questions, and questions lead back to DeHaven." Marisol forced herself upright despite the nausea washing over her. "We keep moving, put more distance between us and them. Then we find somewhere to hole up and heal." "But no arguments. I've survived worse." That was a lie. She'd never been shot before. But Sophia didn't need to know that. They walked the horses through the morning, moving at a pace that made Marisol want to scream with frustration, but was all her body could manage. The wound throbbed with every step, and fever was starting to build behind her eyes. By noon, Miguel was supporting her on one side while Sophia took the other. The small boy and the other girl, who'd revealed her name was Anna, walked ahead, keeping watch. "Tell me about him," Sophia said quietly. "The man who helped you, Gideon." Marisol tried to focus through the fog in her head. "He's good. Better than he thinks he is. Lost his own family and spent years trying to make up for it." "Is he dead?" The question was blunt in the way only children could be. No dancing around hard truths, just asking what needed to be asked. "I don't know," Marisol admitted. "I hope not. But I don't know." They found an abandoned mining shack that afternoon, partially collapsed, but offering shelter from the sun and privacy from the trail. Marisol made it inside before her legs finally gave out completely. The next 3 days passed in a fever haze. Sophia tended the wound as best she could, changing the makeshift bandages and forcing water down Marisol's throat when all she wanted to do was sleep. Miguel kept watch, and the other two children stayed quiet and tried to be useful. On the 4th day, Marisol woke clear-headed for the first time. The wound still hurt, but the infection seemed to be losing its grip. She sat up carefully and found Sophia asleep beside her, dark circles under her eyes. Miguel was at the door, staring out at the desert. When he heard Marisol move, he turned. "You're awake. Really awake." "Yeah." Her voice came out as a croak. "How long was I out?" 3 days, Sophia said. The fever broke this morning. He came over and sat cross-legged beside her. "We were starting to think you might not wake up. Takes more than a bullet to kill me." She touched Sophia's hair gently. "She did good?" "She didn't sleep, just kept checking on you and changing bandages and making sure you drank water." His voice was soft with something that might have been awe. "She's really stubborn." "Yeah, she gets that from me." Marisol looked at her son, this boy who'd survived captivity and stayed strong when most adults would have broken. "You did good too, keeping watch, taking care of everyone." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "I just did what needed doing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Marisol felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. She wasn't sure she'd ever feel peaceful again, but something close. Her children were here. They were alive. They were together. It wasn't everything. Gideon was still missing, probably dead. They were still being hunted by people with resources and reach. The other children trapped into Haven's network were still suffering. But for this moment, in this abandoned shack with the desert wind blowing through the gaps in the walls, they were safe. Sophia woke around midday, startling awake like someone who'd been having nightmares. When she saw Marisol sitting up and alert, relief flooded her face. "You're better. Getting there." Marisol pulled her daughter close, breathing in the smell of her. "Thank you for taking care of me. You came for us. It's the least I could do." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Mama, what happens now? We can't go back to Yuma. Mrs. DeHaven knows who we are, what we look like. And Fletcher, if he's alive, he'll be looking for us." It was the question Marisol had been avoiding thinking about because the answer was so daunting. They couldn't stay in the territory, couldn't go back to anything resembling their old life. Everything they'd known was gone, burned away by 3 months of hell and violence. "We run," she said finally. "We go somewhere they'll never think to look. Somewhere we can start over." "Where? I don't know yet. But somewhere far from here. Somewhere with actual law. Where people like DeHaven don't have every judge and marshal in their pocket." "California, maybe," Miguel suggested. "I heard it's better there." "Maybe. Or north. Oregon, Washington." Marisol shifted, testing her side. The wound pulled but held. "Wherever we go, we leave today. I can ride, and staying here is just giving them time to find us." They packed what little they had, the few supplies they'd managed to grab, the horses, weapons. Anna and the small boy, his name was Thomas, the same as the boy from DeHaven's ranch, watched with quiet acceptance. They'd escaped one prison only to find themselves adrift in a territory that cared nothing for lost children. "What about us?" Anna asked as they prepared to leave. "You gonna just leave us somewhere?" The question was accusatory, and Marisol couldn't blame her for it. The girl had taken a risk escaping with them, and now faced an uncertain future. "No," Marisol said, surprising herself. "You're coming with us, all the way. Wherever we end up, we'll find you somewhere safe, I promise." "Promises don't mean much." "No, they don't. But it's all I've got to give right now." Anna studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you're lying, I'll steal your horse and leave you in the desert." Despite everything, Marisol smiled. "Fair enough." They rode south initially, away from the mountains and toward the border. Marisol's plan was to cross into Mexico, then swing west toward California. It would add weeks to their journey, but would throw off anyone trying to track them. On the second day out from the mining shack, they spotted riders in the distance. 3 of them, moving with purpose. "Could be anyone," Sophia said, but her hand had already moved to the rifle they'd scavenged. "Could be, but we're not taking chances." Marisol guided them into a narrow canyon that offered cover and multiple exit routes. "Everyone stay quiet." They watched as the riders drew closer. And then Marisol's heart kicked hard because she recognized the lead horse. It was Gideon's. He looked like he'd been dragged through hell backward. Face swollen, one arm in a makeshift sling, moving like every step hurt. But alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. "Gideon!" Miguel shouted, and before anyone could stop him, he was running toward the riders. The other 2 riders raised weapons, but Gideon waved them off. As they got closer, Marisol recognized them. 2 of the ranch hands from Diamond Creek, the ones who'd been working the children when she and Gideon had scouted the place months ago. "Easy!" Gideon called out. "They're with me!" Marisol rode out to meet them, torn between joy that he was alive and fury that he'd led strangers to them. "What's going on?" Long story. Short version. These 2 decided they didn't want to work for Webb anymore after what happened at Fletcher's compound. Gideon slid from his horse with obvious pain. "They helped me get out. Figured they'd throw in with us, see about maybe doing something right for a change." The 2 ranch hands looked uncomfortable but determined. One of them, younger, maybe 25, spoke up. "Name's Carson. This is my brother Daniel. We didn't sign up to work for people who hurt kids. When we saw what happened at the compound, saw you fighting to get them out," he shrugged. "Seemed like maybe it was time to pick a different side." "How do I know you're not leading Webb's people right to us?" Marisol asked bluntly. "You don't. But if we wanted you caught, we'd have brought more men and better guns." Carson met her eyes steadily. "We're done with that life. We want to help. Marisol looked at Gideon, trying to read whether this was genuine or some elaborate trap. He nodded slightly. "All right," she said finally. "But if either of you even looks at these children wrong, I'll kill you myself. We clear?" "Clear," Daniel said. He was older than his brother, maybe 30, with scars that suggested a hard life. "For what it's worth, we got kids of our own back in Kansas. Seeing what Webb and DeHaven do to children, it sits wrong." They made camp that night in a defensible position, and over a small fire, Gideon told them what had happened after Marisol fled with the children. "Fletcher's dead," he said flatly. "Your bullet didn't kill him, but the infection from it did. Took him 3 days to die, screaming the whole time. By then his men had scattered. Half of them wanted no part of whatever revenge DeHaven might take for losing inventory, and the other half just wanted to get paid and didn't care enough to chase us." "What about the compound?" Sophia asked. "Burned it. Carson and Daniel helped, freed the rest of the children and gave them supplies to get to the nearest town." He looked at Marisol. "Couldn't save all of them, but we saved some. That's got to count for something." It did. It counted for more than Marisol could put into words. "And DeHaven?" she asked. "Still out there, still operating, but her network's been damaged. Word spread about what happened at the compound. Some of her buyers are getting nervous, pulling out. Won't destroy her operation completely, but it'll slow her down." Gideon's expression was grim. "She'll come after us eventually. People like her always do. Let her come. We'll be ready." They rode west for 2 weeks, staying off main trails and avoiding towns where possible. The group had grown to 7 now. Marisol, Gideon, Sophia, Miguel, Anna, Thomas, and the 2 former ranch hands who proved surprisingly useful. Carson knew the territory well, and Daniel turned out to be decent at hunting, which meant they ate better than they had in months. Slowly, carefully, they began to heal. Sophia's nightmares lessened in frequency. Miguel started playing again, actual playing instead of the careful mimicry of happiness he'd shown at first. Anna and Thomas bonded over shared trauma, speaking in low voices about things they'd endured. And Marisol found herself talking to Gideon during the long hours of riding, sharing stories about who they'd been before all this. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to handle freight, about the sister he'd loved and failed to save. She told him about her brief marriage, about struggling to raise children alone in Yuma, about the terrible choice that had seemed so reasonable at the time. "You didn't fail them," Gideon said one evening. They were sitting watch together while the others slept. "You did what you thought was best with the information you had. I gave my children to a monster. You gave them to someone who lied about who she was. That's not the same thing." He shifted, his wounded arm still paining him. "We're all just doing the best we can with bad options. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's not. But beating yourself up over it doesn't change anything." Spoken like someone who beats himself up constantly over his own failures. He smiled wryly. "Fair point." They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Marisol realized something had shifted between them. The partnership born of desperation had transformed into something else, not quite friendship, more than alliance. A recognition of shared damage and shared determination to make something better from the wreckage. They crossed into California on a gray morning with rain threatening. The border meant nothing, really. No guards, no checkpoint, just a line on a map that most people ignored. But Sophia noticed when Gideon told them they'd crossed, and her face lit up with something that might have been hope. "We're out," she said. "We're actually out of the territory." "For now," Marisol cautioned. "DeHaven's reach extends further than territory lines. But it's a start." Sophia looked at her mother. "Right? It's a start towards something better?" Marisol thought about all the things she should say. That better was relative, that they'd never be completely safe. The trauma didn't just disappear because you crossed an invisible line. But looking at her daughter's face, at the tentative hope blooming there, she found herself nodding. "Yeah, baby, it's a start." They found land 3 weeks later in a valley so remote the nearest town was a day's ride. The property had been abandoned by whoever homesteaded it first. Broken down buildings, overgrown fields, a spring that still flowed clean and cold. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They rebuilt. Slowly, painfully, with setbacks and arguments and days when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But they rebuilt. Gideon and the brothers repaired the main house, making it weatherproof and solid. Marisol and Sophia worked the land, planting crops that might actually take root if they were lucky. Miguel and Thomas tended chickens they'd bought with the last of their money. Anna, who turned out to have a talent for it, started a garden. It was hard work, brutal work. Some days they barely managed to feed themselves. But it was their work, done for their benefit, and that made all the difference. Miguel healed fastest, his resilience the kind that came from youth, and an innate optimism Marisol hadn't managed to crush. Within months, he was laughing again, running through the fields with Thomas and making plans for the future, like the future was something he had a right to expect. Sophia healed slower. The nightmares persisted. Some days she couldn't bear to be touched, and other days she clung to Marisol like she was 5 instead of 8. But gradually, incrementally, she started to trust that this was real, that they weren't going back, that the future might actually include happiness. Anna and Thomas were harder to reach. They'd been in the system longer, been hurt more deeply. But having stable adults who didn't demand labor or obedience in exchange for basic care seemed to slowly crack their armor. Anna started smiling occasionally. Thomas stopped flinching every time someone moved too quickly. The brothers stayed, helping with the heavy labor and teaching the children skills they'd need: how to shoot properly, how to track, how to handle horses. They never asked for payment beyond room and board. Carson said once that this was his penance, his way of balancing the scale for the years he'd spent working for men like Webb. Daniel never said much at all, but his actions spoke clearly enough. And Gideon became the foundation the whole operation rested on. He organized work crews, handled what little money they had, made runs to town for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. He taught Miguel to read better and helped Sophia work through her anger by giving her projects that let her build instead of destroy. He also, quietly and without fanfare, became part of Marisol's life in ways she hadn't expected. They worked side by side most days, falling into patterns of cooperation that felt natural. They talked in the evenings while watching the children play. They shared worries about money and crops and whether they'd survive the winter. And one night, 6 months after they'd claimed the land, Marisol looked at him across the fire and realized she loved him. Not the desperate, grateful love of someone who'd been saved, but something deeper and more complicated. The love of someone who'd seen another person at their worst and their best and chosen to stay anyway. The love of partnership and shared burden and quiet moments that didn't need words. She didn't tell him, wasn't sure how to without ruining the equilibrium they'd found, but she thought maybe he knew anyway, from the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. A year passed, then 2. The homestead grew more solid, more permanent. They expanded the house, added a barn, fenced pastures for the cattle they'd managed to buy. The children grew like weeds. Miguel shot up 4 inches and started helping with real ranch work. Sophia became fierce and competent and still stubborn as hell, and the other children filled out and found their own rhythms. Word spread slowly that the Kane homestead would take in children who needed a place. They never asked questions about where kids came from or what they'd been through, just fed them, gave them beds, put them to work in ways that built skills instead of breaking spirits. Some stayed, some moved on once they were old enough and strong enough to face the world again. But all of them left knowing they'd been cared for by people who understood what it meant to be lost and then found. DeHaven never came for them. Marisol heard rumors occasionally that the woman had moved her operations to Nevada, that authorities had finally started investigating, that her network was crumbling. But nothing concrete. Just whispers that suggested the monster who'd stolen her children was still out there, still hurting people, still operating with impunity. It should have bothered Marisol more than it did. But she'd learned something in the years since fleeing the territory. You couldn't save everyone. You couldn't fix all the broken systems or defeat all the evil people. All you could do was protect your own, build something good from the ashes of something terrible, and hope that was enough. Some days it felt like enough, other days it didn't. But she kept going anyway. 3 years after they'd claimed the land, on a clear autumn morning when the cottonwood by the spring had turned gold, Marisol and Gideon stood beneath its branches and married. It wasn't a fancy ceremony, just the people they'd built this life with, standing witness while they promised to keep doing what they'd already been doing for years. Sophia and Miguel stood beside them, and when the moment came for someone to ask if anyone objected, Miguel grinned and said, "Took you long enough." Everyone laughed. and Marisol felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. That evening, after the small celebration had wound down and the children were asleep, Marisol and Gideon sat by the spring and watched stars emerge. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked. "This life, it's not what you probably imagined back in Yuma." "Nothing about my life has been what I imagined," Marisol said. "But that doesn't make it wrong." She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, alone, making terrible choices out of love and ignorance. That woman would barely recognize who she'd become. Harder in some ways, yes. More capable of violence, more aware of how cruel the world could be, but also stronger, more certain of what mattered. "I learned something," she said quietly. "Going through all that, losing the kids, getting them back, fighting for every inch of ground. What's that? That love isn't some gentle thing. It's not soft or easy or nice." She looked at her hands, scarred from work and fighting. "Real love is fierce. It's choosing to keep going when everything says to quit. It's fighting for people even when the odds are impossible. It's building something from nothing and defending it against everything that tries to tear it down." Gideon nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is. And the world's full of people like DeHaven. People who take and hurt and destroy because they can. Because there's profit in it." Her voice went hard. "But the world's also full of people who fight back, who see what's wrong and try to make it right, even knowing they'll probably fail." "You didn't fail, didn't I?" "DeHaven's still out there. There are still children being sold, still families being destroyed. We saved a handful, but thousands more need help we can't give. So we save the ones we can," Gideon said. "We build this place into something stable and good. We raise these children to be strong enough to fight their own battles, and maybe, if we're lucky, they go on to save others." He took her hand. "That's all anyone can do. Try to leave things a little better than they found them." Marisol laced her fingers through his, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "You think we're leaving things better? Look around." He gestured toward the homestead, solid buildings, productive land, children sleeping safe in their beds. 3 years ago, this place was abandoned. Now it's a home. Not just for us, but for kids who had nowhere else to go. "Yeah, I think we're leaving things better." She wanted to believe him. Some days she did. Other days she looked at the scars on her body and her children's faces and wondered if better was enough when there was still so much wrong in the world. But sitting there by the spring, with Gideon's hand in hers and the sound of the homestead settling for the night around them, she felt something close to peace. Not happiness. Happiness was too simple for what she felt. But satisfaction, maybe. The knowledge that they'd fought for something that mattered and won, at least partially. That her children were safe, that they'd built a life out of desperation and determination, that sometimes, just sometimes, love and stubbornness were enough. 5 years after they had first arrived at the homestead, Sophia turned 13 and announced she wanted to learn to track. Not just casual observation, but real tracking, the kind that could find people who didn't want to be found. "Why?" Marisol asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because there are other kids out there, like we were, like Anna and Thomas were." Sophia's jaw was set in a way that reminded Marisol painfully of herself. "And someone needs to find them." Marisol looked at her daughter, this fierce, damaged, brilliant girl who'd survived hell and come out the other side still believing in justice, and she felt fear and pride in equal measure. "It's dangerous work," she said carefully. "I know, you taught me that." Sophia met her mother's eyes. "But you also taught me it's worth doing anyway." There was no arguing with that. Marisol had spent 5 years teaching her children to be strong, to stand up for what was right, to fight when fighting was necessary. She couldn't complain now that they'd learned the lessons too well. So she taught Sophia to track, and shoot, and read people's intentions from their body language. All the skills Marisol herself had learned the hard way, passed down to the next generation in hopes they wouldn't need them, but knowing they would. Miguel went a different direction. He loved the land, loved animals, loved the quiet satisfaction of making things grow. By 15, he was running most of the agricultural operations, experimenting with crops and irrigation in ways that made the homestead not just sustainable, but actually profitable. Anna discovered she had a gift for healing. She started with animals, setting broken wings and treating sick cattle with a gentleness that belied the hardness life had beaten into her. Eventually, people from neighboring homesteads started bringing her their ailments, and she began learning from the circuit doctor who passed through twice a year. Thomas became the homestead's builder, apprenticing with Daniel and developing an intuitive understanding of how things fit together. By 16, he was designing expansions and improvements that made their lives easier. They were becoming who they were meant to be. And watching them grow, Marisol felt something she'd never expected to feel again after everything they'd been through. Hope. Not naive hope that ignored the darkness in the world, but grounded hope that acknowledged the darkness and chose to build light anyway. 7 years after claiming the land, Marisol stood on the porch of the house they'd rebuilt and watched Miguel and Thomas work with a new group of children who'd arrived the previous week, teaching them, showing them patience and care, passing on what they'd learned about survival and recovery. Gideon came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "You did good," he said quietly. "We did good," she corrected. "None of this works without all of us." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Had a letter from Carson yesterday. He's up in Oregon now, running a similar operation, taking in kids who need help." "That's good." He asked if we'd consider expanding, maybe help set up more places like this across California and beyond. Create an actual network, but one that helps instead of hurts. Marisol turned to look at him. "You want to do it?" "I think it's worth considering. We've proven it can work. And there are a lot of children out there who need what we've built here." He met her eyes. "But it would mean more risk, more exposure. DeHaven might be damaged, but people like her are still operating. They won't take kindly to us building something that threatens their business." "Let them try to stop us," Marisol said. The old anger was still there, she realized, banked but not extinguished. "We fought them before. We can do it again." Gideon smiled. "Yeah, we can." They started planning that same day. Within a year, 3 more homesteads had opened across California, all running on the same model, taking children who'd been abandoned or abused or trafficked, give them safety and structure and a chance to heal, then help them find their path forward. Some stayed and worked the land. Others moved on to different lives, carrying with them the knowledge that they were worth saving. It wasn't perfect. They lost some children to illness or accidents or the lingering trauma that medicine couldn't reach. Some adults who came to help turned out to have darker motives and had to be sent away. Money was always tight. The work was endless and exhausting, but it mattered. Every child saved was a victory against the darkness. Every person who chose to help instead of hurt shifted the balance slightly towards something better. And Marisol learned that fighting wasn't something you did once and then stopped. It was ongoing, daily, a choice renewed every morning to keep building instead of surrendering. Some battles you won completely, others you just fought to a standstill, holding ground against forces that wanted to take it back. But you fought anyway, because the alternative was giving up, and giving up meant the people who hurt children would keep doing it unchallenged. 10 years after they had first arrived at the homestead, Marisol stood once again beneath the cottonwood tree by the spring. This time, she wasn't alone. Sophia stood beside her, 20 years old and harder than steel. Miguel, now 16 and tall as his father had been. Anna and Thomas, both adults now, running their own homestead in the next valley. Carson and Daniel returned for the gathering. Gideon, graying at the temples but still strong. And dozens of others, children they'd helped over the years, now grown. People who'd heard about what they were building and wanted to be part of it. A community built not on blood or geography, but on shared understanding that the world was harsh and people needed to look out for each other. They'd gathered to discuss expanding further, to states beyond California. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but Marisol had learned that ambitious was sometimes the only thing that worked. As the meeting broke up and people scattered to their tasks, Sophia pulled her mother aside. "I've been tracking rumors," she said quietly, "about DeHaven. She's operating out of Colorado now, scaled back but still active." Marisol felt the old rage stir. "You thinking about going after her?" "I'm thinking someone should." Sophia's eyes were hard. "She's still hurting children, still selling them, and the law still doesn't care enough to stop her. So you want to do what? Ride into Colorado and shoot her?" "If that's what it takes." Sophia's voice was flat, certain. "She destroyed our family once. She's destroyed hundreds of others. At some point, someone has to make her stop permanently. Marisol wanted to argue, wanted to tell her daughter that revenge was poison, that killing DeHaven wouldn't undo the damage, that there were better ways. But looking at Sophia's face, she recognized her own determination reflected back at her. "If you do this," she said slowly, "you do it smart, not alone, not rushing in angry." She gripped Sophia's shoulders. "And you understand that once you cross that line, you can't uncross it. Killing someone, even someone who deserves it, it changes you." "I know, you've told me." Sophia met her mother's eyes. "But some things need doing anyway." Marisol pulled her daughter close, holding tight. "Then you take backup. You plan carefully, and you come home when it's done. You hear me? Whatever happens, you come home." "I will," Sophia promised, and Marisol chose to believe her. She watched her daughter ride out a week later, accompanied by 3 others who'd survived DeHaven's network and wanted their own justice. They were well-armed, well-trained, and utterly determined. Marisol didn't sleep well for the 6 weeks they were gone, but when Sophia finally returned, riding up to the homestead in early morning light, Marisol knew before she spoke that it was done. "She's dead," Sophia said simply, burned her operation to the ground, freed the children she was holding, made sure she couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. "And you?" Marisol asked, studying her daughter's face. "Are you all right?" Sophia thought about it. "I don't know. Ask me in a year." Fair enough. They never spoke about the specifics of what happened in Colorado. Sophia kept that burden to herself, and Marisol respected the choice. Some weights were meant to be carried alone, but the nightmares that had plagued Sophia for years began to fade after that. Not completely. Some scars never fully healed, but enough that she could sleep through most nights without waking in terror. The years continued to pass. The network of safe homesteads grew to encompass 7 states. Hundreds of children found safety and healing. Some of them went on to create their own places of refuge. Others became lawyers, doctors, teachers, using their experiences to help from different angles. Marisol's hair went gray. Her body accumulated scars and aches that never quite faded. But she also accumulated grandchildren. Sophia married and had twins. Miguel found a wife who loved the land as much as he did, and they filled the homestead with noise and life, and the kind of chaos that came from children who'd never known anything but safety. And one autumn evening, 30 years after she'd first pointed a gun at Gideon Vale in the Arizona desert, Marisol sat on the porch of the homestead they'd built and watched the sun set over land they'd claimed and held and made into something good. Gideon sat beside her, moving slower these days, but still present, still steady. "You ever think about those early days?" he asked. "When we were running for our lives, not sure we'd survive the week?" "Sometimes," Marisol admitted. "Feels like a different life, different people." "We were different people, younger, more desperate. More hopeful, too, in a strange way." She looked at her hands, aged and weathered, but still strong. "We didn't know if we'd succeed, but we believed we might. That kind of belief gets harder as you get older and see how many things can go wrong. But we did succeed. Look at all this." He gestured at the homestead, at the children playing in the yard, at the life they'd built. "We fought for something that mattered, and we won." "We won our piece of it," Marisol corrected. "The bigger fight's still going on. There are still people out there hurting children, still systems that allow it. We made a dent, but the war isn't over." "Wars never really end," Gideon said. "They just change. Next generation picks up where we leave off, fights their version of it." He took her hand. "But that's all right. We did our part, taught our children to do theirs. That's enough." Marisol wanted to argue that it wasn't enough, that there was still so much wrong in the world. But sitting there, feeling the weight of Gideon's hand in hers, and watching children play without fear, she found she couldn't. Maybe this was what winning looked like, when the battle was too big for any one person to finish. You fought your piece of it. You saved who you could save. You built something good, and you taught the next generation to defend it and expand it. And you accepted that you couldn't fix everything, but that didn't mean the things you did fix didn't matter. "Yeah," she said finally, it's enough." The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Closer, Sophia called out about dinner being ready. The homestead settled into evening routines that had been perfected over decades. And Marisol Kane, who'd started this journey as a desperate mother with nothing but determination, sat surrounded by the family she'd fought for and the life they'd built together, and allowed herself to feel something she'd denied herself for 30 years. Peace. Not because the world was fixed, not because evil had been defeated, but because she'd fought anyway. Because her children were safe, because they'd created something worth protecting from the ruins of what they'd lost. Because sometimes stubbornness and love and the refusal to quit were enough to change the world, one saved child at a time. And that, in the end, was the only victory that truly mattered.